Welcome back, legends. You're at No Harry. Another incredible story awaits. What if Voldemort's killing curse freed Harry from 98 bindings and Nick Fury watching entire time? Subscribe and hit the bell. Let's dive right in. Chapter 1, The Forest Floor. The trees didn't care. That was the thing Harry noticed, walking through the forbidden forest with Neville's sword at his hip and death waiting somewhere ahead in the dark. The trees didn't care. They'd been here before any of them were born, and they'd be here long after. They creaked in the cold November wind with a kind of indifference that was almost comforting. No expectations. No plans drawn up in old offices with half-moon spectacles and a long white beard. Just bark and root and the slow, ancient patience of things that didn't need saving and didn't need a chosen one. Harry kept walking. Ron had tried to follow him. He'd gotten 3 steps before Harry turned around with a look that stopped him cold, not angry, not pleading, just certain, and something in Ron's face had crumpled a little and then steadied, the way it always did when Ron Weasley decided to be brave about something that was breaking him. He'd nodded once. Hermione had pressed her fist against her mouth. Harry hadn't let himself look at her for long because if he did he'd stop walking, and he couldn't stop walking. The resurrection stone was in his pocket. His parents had walked with him. Sirius. Lupin. They'd been pale and thin and beautiful and wrong in the way that only the dead can be wrong, present without weight, there without warmth. His mother had said, "We're so proud." His father had said, "You've been so brave." Lupin had said something about his son, and Harry had heard it the way you hear words underwater, muffled and distorted by the roaring in his own skull. He'd let the stone fall somewhere in the dark. He didn't need them for this part. The clearing came up on him faster than he expected. One moment he was threading between oaks, dead leaves turning under his boots, and then the trees thinned and opened up, and there they were, 100 Death Eaters arranged in a rough circle around a fire that threw orange light across pale faces and dark masks, and at the center of it, tall and white and so utterly still he might have been carved from something, Lord Voldemort. He was holding a wand loosely, the way a man holds a knife he's used so many times he stopped thinking about it. Harry stepped into the light. There was a sound from the Death Eaters, a ripple, something between a laugh and an exhale of collective disbelief, and then silence so complete Harry could hear the fire popping. He kept his hands at his sides. His wand was in his pocket. He didn't reach for it. Voldemort looked at him for a long moment. Those red eyes moved over Harry with an expression that wasn't quite triumph and wasn't quite something else. It was almost curious. "Harry Potter," he said, and his voice carried across the clearing like smoke. "The boy who lived. Come to die." "More or less," Harry said. Someone in the circle of Death Eaters laughed. "Bellatrix, probably, it always was," and Voldemort raised a hand without looking and the laugh stopped. "No last words," he said. "No bravery. No speech." Harry looked at him steadily. Would it matter? Something moved across Voldemort's face, amusement, maybe, the cold intellectual kind that had nothing to do with warmth. "No," he said. "I suppose it wouldn't." He raised the Elder Wand. Harry didn't close his eyes. The green light came. 43,000 feet above the forbidden forest, in the belly of a modified Stark-era surveillance drone running dark with all transponder signals killed, a man with one eye watched a thermal display and said, very quietly, "Huh." Nick Fury had been in the business of watching things that shouldn't exist for long enough that almost nothing surprised him anymore. He'd watched a man turn into a rage monster in a Calcutta back alley. He'd watched a god fall from the sky in a New Mexico desert. He'd watched a 90-pound woman hit a super soldier hard enough to dent a wall. The magical community of Great Britain had been on S.H.I.E.L.D.'s radar since 1991, when a series of localized atmospheric anomalies over Surrey had pinged 17 different early detection arrays simultaneously, and a field agent named Coulson had filed a report so strange that 3 separate analysts had independently flagged it as a system error. Fury had read it, cross-referenced it with 2 decades of similar anomaly clusters going back to 1943, and opened a new file he titled simply, Wand. The file was now 460 pages long. He'd watched them the way you watch a country that hasn't started a war yet, carefully, at a distance, with the quiet awareness that you might need to understand them very suddenly and very completely without any warning. He'd built the sensor array over 8 years, piece by piece, never letting any single contractor know what the whole picture looked like. The array could detect focused magical discharge within a 3-mile radius, map the thermal signatures of large-scale supernatural events, and, crucially, detect what his analyst Dr. Foster, borrowed briefly from the astrophysics division, had classified as binding resonance fields. The magical community bound things constantly. People, objects, places, entire bloodlines. The binding fields had a signature as distinct as a fingerprint, and over the course of his surveillance, Fury had catalogued thousands of them across Britain. Most were ambient, old, so deeply woven into the landscape they barely registered as anything other than background noise. But the boy Harry Potter, had been, from the first moment Fury's sensors had locked onto him, the single most heavily bound magical signature in the entire country. 98 discrete binding fields, layered so intricately that his analyst had initially thought the readout was corrupted. They weren't corrupted. Someone, multiple someones, over multiple years, with extraordinary precision and skill, had wrapped that boy in so many magical constraints that what should have been an extraordinary power signature read as barely there. Like trying to see a supernova through 98 layers of smoked glass. Fury had wondered about that, on and off, for years. Who put them there? Why? What they were afraid of. Tonight, it seemed, he was going to find out. The green light detonated against Harry Potter's chest and Fury watched the thermal display go absolutely haywire. Sir. His comms officer's voice was careful. Controlled. The way people got when they were watching something they had no framework for. I'm reading, I don't, sir, the binding array around the subject, I see it, Fury said. The bindings were breaking. Not slowly. Not one at a time. All of them, in a cascading chain reaction, like a string of lights popping in sequence, one going dark and the detonation traveling to the next and the next and the next, 98 points of constrained magical energy releasing simultaneously into a boy lying on a forest floor. The thermal display went white. Fury stood very still for 3 full seconds. Then he reached over and pulled up the communications array. Get me Hill, he said. And someone wake up Banner. I want him on a call in 10 minutes. He paused. And somebody find out if Stark's sober. Harry fell. That was the first thing. The green light hit and there was a sensation of impact, not pain, exactly, more like being struck by something enormous and very fast, and then the ground came up and he was on his back on the cold earth with dead leaves pressed against his cheek and the sky above him a deep, lightless black between the trees. He thought, so this is dying. Then the world cracked open. It started in his chest. A warmth that was too large to be contained by warmth, something that had no name because it had never needed one because it had never been free before. It moved outward from his sternum in waves, down his arms to his fingertips, up his neck, behind his eyes. It felt like every door in a house being flung open at once, like every window being broken simultaneously, like standing on a hilltop in a wind so strong it should knock you down but instead it just holds you. He felt them break. Not one at a time, all of them. He couldn't have told you how he knew they were there, in that moment, any more than you can articulate how you know you've been holding your breath until you finally exhale. He just felt them, suddenly, as absences. As chains that had been so familiar he'd mistaken them for his own skeleton, now gone. The one on his magic, the deep throttling bind that had kept his power at a fraction of its true scale for as long as he could remember, he'd never known it wasn't natural, he'd never had anything to compare it to. Gone. The blood ward compression. The familial suppression that had been layered in through his parents' magic at birth, he understood dimly, by someone who had known exactly what he would become. Gone. The Horcrux's contamination, that dark, clinging thing in his scar that had been part of him for 16 years, gone too, burned away by the curse that was supposed to kill him and had instead done something far stranger. Harry lay on the forest floor and felt himself for the first time. It was overwhelming. It was also, and this was the part he hadn't expected, clarifying. Everything was sharp. The rough texture of the soil against his palm. The specific weight and movement of the wind. The fire in the clearing 40 meters away, the heat of it reaching him even at this distance as something precise and mappable. The 100 people standing around it, each of them a presence with a kind of texture, a kind of flavor, fear and exhilaration and cruelty and grief and the complex layered thing that was Voldemort, dark and cold and vast and old in a way that had nothing to do with years. He became aware, very slowly, that something else had survived the curse along with him. The scar was gone. His hand went to his forehead. Smooth skin under his fingertips, nothing more. He pressed harder. Nothing. He sat up. It took him a moment to realize he was in the limbo place, the King's Cross that wasn't King's Cross, the white light, the impossibly high ceiling, the sense of being suspended between two states of being. And there, in the corner, a small and ruined thing, a flayed infant, mewling and wretched, which was what remained of Voldemort's soul after tonight. It had been inside him and now it was out and it was broken. He did not go to it. Dumbledore was there too. Sat in a chair that materialized the way furniture always did in dreams, simply present without arriving. He was dressed in robes of pale blue and he looked very old and very tired and, Harry thought, somewhat ashamed. Or something adjacent to ashamed. The particular expression of a man who had known a reckoning was coming and had told himself, for long enough and convincingly enough, that the outcome would justify it. "Harry," he said. "Don't," Harry said. Dumbledore was quiet. Harry looked at him. Not with anger, he'd expected anger, had braced himself for it, the hot furious kind that had always felt like fire behind his sternum. What he felt instead was something colder and more precise. The way you feel about a very complicated thing when you finally see the whole of it clearly. "You knew," Harry said. "From the beginning." "Not from the beginning," Dumbledore said. "But yes. For some time. The bindings." A pause. "Some of them were necessary." "Some were, 98, Harry said. "I could feel them all break." He watched Dumbledore's face. "How many did you place yourself?" The silence that followed was its own answer. I needed to be controllable," Harry said. "Manageable. You needed me to walk into that forest and die and not fight back and not question it and not be enough of a threat that anyone would think to stop me." He kept his voice level. "So you built me that way." "I built you survivable," Dumbledore said, and for the first time something raw moved across his expression. "Harry. If those bindings had never been placed, if you had come into your full power at 11 years old, at 12, at any point before you were ready, the wizarding world would have responded with a fear so total it would have destroyed you differently than Voldemort ever could. I have seen what they do to power they cannot understand." Harry looked at the ruined thing in the corner. "You could have told me." "You would have, I would have understood," Harry said, and his voice was very quiet and very firm, and Dumbledore, for perhaps the first time, looked genuinely uncertain. "I was a kid with no parents in a cupboard under the stairs who used to accidentally make glass disappear so the snake could breathe. I would have understood being afraid of something you didn't understand. I understood that better than anyone." He stood. "What I don't understand is being used." Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was very old and very tired and entirely without pretension. "No," he said. "I don't suppose you do." "I'm going back," Harry said. "Yes. And when I do," he began. "Everything will be different," Dumbledore said. "Yes. I know." He met Harry's eyes. "I am sorry, Harry. That is real, whatever else was not." Harry looked at him for a moment longer. Then he turned and walked toward the light. "You have a choice," Dumbledore said, behind him. You always did. That, at least, was never the manipulation. The prophecy, the path, all of it, but the choice was always real. Harry stopped. I know, he said. And he walked into the light. Narcissa Malfoy knelt over him in the dark. He felt her hands on his chest before he fully surfaced, cool fingers pressing against his sternum, checking for a heartbeat. He kept his breathing controlled, even, the long slow rise and fall of genuine unconsciousness, and he felt her breath against his cheek as she leaned in very close. Is he alive? Voldemort's voice, from somewhere above and behind. Narcissa's fingers stilled on his chest. He felt, and this was new, this was one of the things that had cracked open when the bindings broke, the complexity of what was happening inside her. The calculation. The grief. The love she'd given to Draco that had overridden every other loyalty in her life. He is dead, she said. Her hand pressed, very briefly, just slightly harder against his ribs. Stay still. He stayed still. Voldemort's laughter was terrible and triumphant and filled the forest, and Harry lay absolutely motionless on the ground and felt, through the new and extraordinary precision of his senses, exactly 103 people in that clearing, their proximity and their emotional states and the particular dark energy radiating from Voldemort like heat from a furnace. He could end it right now. From here. Without moving. He didn't. Not yet, he thought. There's a better way. Hagrid carried him. This was exactly as uncomfortable as you would imagine. Being carried by a half-giant was not gentle under any circumstances, and being carried while pretending to be dead added the additional challenge of not reflexively grabbing for something when Hagrid stumbled over a root. Harry focused on keeping limp, focused on breathing in tiny measured increments that wouldn't be visible, focused on the sounds around him, the Death Eaters falling into procession, the crunch of their footsteps, voices low and celebratory and ugly. He was cataloging them. Voices, names he recognized, names he didn't. The ones he heard talking about what they were going to do once this was over. He filed every word away with a precision he'd never had before, his mind suddenly a clean and organized thing that retained everything. The forest gave way to the grounds. He felt the castle come into range before he saw it, Hogwarts, vast and warm and complicated, its enchantments layered over centuries like geological strata, its magic a living thing that had always, he now realized, recognized him. The castle was alive in a way no one talked about, and it had always known who he was, had always responded to him in small ways he'd never questioned until now. He felt it reach for him as Hagrid carried him across the grounds, felt it adjust something in its ancient structure, a door unlocking somewhere, a passage opening, as if making room. Welcoming something home. Then he heard Neville's voice. Sharp and furious, cutting through the sounds of Death Eater celebration, Neville, who'd been dragged out of the crowd or pushed forward or simply stood up because Neville Longbottom had always been the bravest of them in the ways that counted most. He was shouting something about Hogwarts, about fighting, about none of them giving up, and then Harry heard Voldemort silence him with a spell and heard the thud and Seamus's yell from somewhere to the left and Ginny's voice, high and frightened and furious, and Luna's, oddly calm. He heard Voldemort put on the sorting hat and he heard the fire start. Now, he thought. He moved. It was different, falling from Hagrid's arms was deliberate, intentional, a controlled drop to the ground that Hagrid registered with a sound of alarm, and Harry was already standing when the hat burned, already facing Voldemort across 30 meters of fire-lit ground, and the 1,000 people who'd gathered at the castle's entrance went very, very quiet. He'd expected to have to shout to be heard. He didn't. His voice carried without effort, clear and calm and large in a way that had nothing to do with volume. Tom, he said. He'd never called him that before. Not in person. Not like this, like a name, which is all it was, after all. Just a name. Just a boy who'd been afraid of what he was and had tried to unmake death itself and had ended up hollowed out by his own ambition into something that barely qualified as human anymore. Voldemort went still. Not the theatrical stillness he used as a weapon, a genuine, arrested stillness. The stillness of a man hearing something he did not expect and does not, quite, have a category for. You missed, Harry said. The silence lasted exactly 3 seconds. Then the world erupted. Maria Hill's voice came through the earpiece clipped to Fury's ear with the crisp efficiency she deployed when she was, professionally, absolutely fine and, personally, trying to decide whether to be alarmed. The binding array is completely gone, sir. We're reading the subject's unfiltered power signature for the first time and I need you to understand that our calibration scale doesn't go that high. How high does it go? Fury said. Currently topping out at what we've been calling a Class 7 event horizon. And the subject? A pause. Sir, a Class 7 is a city-leveling event. I'm aware, Hill. He's walking, she said. He just walked back out of the forest and, another pause. He just said something. We can't get audio at this range. But sir, whatever he said, I'm reading emotional resonance spikes from approximately 1,000 individuals simultaneously. Fury watched the display. The boy was standing very straight and very still in the firelight and he was looking at someone, across a stretch of open ground, and the power signature coming off him was the single most extraordinary thing Fury had seen since the Tesseract. And what struck him, what made him lean forward slightly in the dark belly of the drone, was not the magnitude of the power. It was the control. Even raw, even newly unbound, there was no scatter. No undirected discharge. The energy was contained, shaped, directed with a precision that shouldn't have been possible in the first 30 seconds of someone discovering they were something other than what they thought they were. The kid had been this, Fury realized, his whole life. He'd just never been allowed to know it. Run the analysis, he said. Everything. Cross-reference with the Asgardian readings from New Mexico, the gamma signatures from Calcutta, the serum metabolic data. I want to know where this fits in the landscape. And if it doesn't fit? Hill said. Then we make a new category, Fury said. Below, in the glow of castle fire and wand light, Harry Potter and Lord Voldemort began to move toward each other. Fury watched. He'd been watching for years, accumulating data, building a picture pixel by patient pixel. He'd watched this boy lose people he loved and come back. He'd watched him face things that would have broken professionals, trained, equipped, prepared professionals, and face them with nothing but a wand he'd bought at 11 years old and a stubbornness that Fury, privately, recognized because he had some of it himself. He'd filed it all under extraordinary human resilience and kept it in the back section of the wand folder. He was revising that assessment now. The battle happening below was, even from 43,000 feet, even through thermal sensors and a crackly satellite uplink, clearly not going the way it had presumably gone in everyone's plans. The Death Eaters were not watching a corpse carried in triumph. They were watching something walk back out of the dark, and Fury could read the disruption in the thermal signatures of the crowd, the chaos, the panic starting at the edges, the cluster of signals around the tall central figure that was Voldemort tightening as his people tried to figure out what they were supposed to do now. The boy, Harry Potter, 17 years old, newly unbound, carrying the sum total of every chain ever placed on him as nothing but air, said something else Fury's audio couldn't catch. The crowd's panic doubled. Sir, Hill said again. We're also reading something else. A secondary signature. Very old. Very large. It's coming from, she stopped. From where? Fury said. From the castle, she said. The castle is responding to him, sir. Whatever those bindings were suppressing, the castle's magic has recognized it. It's like, she paused again, hunting for the word. It's like it's been waiting. Fury was quiet for a moment. Then he said, get me a flight plan to London. Commercial cover, government credentials, the clean set. He reached over and closed the thermal display, then opened it again because closing it felt, for some reason, like blinking first. And pull everything we have on one Albus Dumbledore. I want to know exactly who put those bindings on that boy and why. Dumbledore is dead, sir. I know, Fury said. Pull it anyway. Below, the battle for Hogwarts was beginning in earnest. And in the center of it, moving through the chaos with the steady, unhurried certainty of something that had finally come into itself, Harry Potter raised his wand for the first time tonight, the first time with nothing between him and the full weight of what he actually was. The air around him shimmered. Fury had seen a lot of things. He'd seen the Tesseract go active. He'd seen Thor call lightning in the middle of a parking lot in New Mexico. He'd watched on a monitor as Steve Rogers pulled a helicopter down single-handed. The shimmer around Harry Potter was different from all of those. It wasn't destructive. It wasn't violent. It was organized, he thought, which was a strange word to apply to a supernatural event, but it was the right one. Every particle of it purposeful. Not power running loose. Power that knew exactly what it was doing. Hill, he said. Sir. Make sure that flight plan is ready in the next 4 hours. Already done, she said. Fury leaned back in his chair, one eye fixed on the display, and watched the most interesting thing he'd seen in 20 years unfold on a hillside in Scotland. His file on Harry Potter was about to need a very significant update. Down on the grounds of Hogwarts, with the castle at his back and 1,000 wands on both sides of the divide and Voldemort 10 meters away going very, very still in a way that was not quite fear and not quite recognition but somewhere between them, Harry felt the last of the disorientation from the forest fall away. He was completely, entirely, himself. For the first time. It was a strange feeling to articulate. He wasn't larger, he wasn't louder, he hadn't grown or changed shape. He looked the same as he'd always looked, messy dark hair, glasses, the too thin build of someone who'd grown up with barely enough to eat. He was still wearing the same clothes he'd worn into the forest. His scar was gone and the absence of it felt clean, like a window opened in a room that had been shut for too long. What was different was what was underneath. The thing that had always been there, behind the glass, behind the smoke, behind 98 carefully designed constraints, it was out now. And it had no interest in going back. Voldemort took a step toward him. Harry looked at him the way you look at a problem you've finally found the correct solution to. You should run, Harry said, and meant it, genuinely, without theatrics. Not because he was afraid of what he'd have to do if Tom didn't. Because he wasn't. Voldemort laughed. It echoed off the castle walls and Fury heard it from 43,000 feet and Harry heard the fear in it, the specific note of a man laughing at something because the alternative to laughing is admitting he doesn't understand it, and Voldemort had always, run from what he didn't understand. Tonight, that was going to be a problem. I killed you, Voldemort said. You tried, Harry said. And I appreciate the effort. It was actually very helpful. The silence that fell was bewildered on every side. Harry raised his wand. The air answered. Ch1 Chapter 2, what the censors said the first Death Eater to move was Antonin Dolohov. He'd always been quick, that was his reputation, built over 2 wars and a body count that made even other Death Eaters speak carefully around him. He moved from the left side of the crowd with his wand already mid-arc, the violet flame curse he favored leaving a streak of sickly light in the dark air, aimed not at Harry's center mass but at his throat, because Dolohov had survived long enough to learn that you aimed for what people couldn't shield fast enough. Harry didn't shield. He stepped left, a single, fluid step, the curse passing close enough that he felt the displaced air against his cheek, and flicked his wand once. Dolohov left the ground. Not violently, not with a crack of thunder or a flash of light. He simply rose, smoothly, about 4 feet off the grass, and then stopped, suspended, his wand arm pinned to his side by something invisible and absolute. He hung there making a face like a man who had put his hand on a hot stove and hasn't yet processed the full implication of what's happening. The crowd went very quiet again. Anyone else want to start? Harry said. No one moved. Even Voldemort, which was interesting, he was watching Harry with those red eyes doing something they almost never did, which was think. Not rage. Not contempt. Genuine, cold, recalculating thought. Harry could feel the specific quality of it, the way he could feel everything now with that new and unnerving clarity, the texture of a mind that had been the most dangerous thing in the British wizarding world for 60 years trying to figure out what it was looking at. Good, Harry thought. Think fast. I'll wait. Bellatrix Lestrange didn't think. Bellatrix never thought, it was, in a perverse way, her greatest strength. She screamed something wordless and threw 3 curses simultaneously in a spray pattern that was genuinely impressive technique, the kind of thing you only develop from years of practice, which in her case meant years of torturing people in their homes. Harry caught 2 of them and let the third, a bone-breaking hex aimed at his wand arm, hit. Except it didn't break anything. It connected with a sound like a bell, not the crack of impact but a clear, resonant tone, and scattered off him in 4 directions like water off stone. Bellatrix stumbled back a step. He saw the exact moment she processed what had happened, watched it move through her face from confusion to the beginning of something he'd never seen on Bellatrix Lestrange before. Uncertainty. Bella, Voldemort said, very quietly, and she stopped. The 2 of them looked at each other across the firelit ground. Voldemort's expression had settled into something that Harry recognized from chess, the look of a player who has just realized the board is different than he thought it was and is not going to make another move until he understands how. Harry was perfectly happy to let him look. "You're not the same," Voldemort said finally. "No," Harry agreed. "I'm not. What did I do to you?" Harry smiled, not warmly, not cruelly, just honestly. "You freed me," he said. "Which I don't think was the goal." The silence lasted about 2 seconds. Then Voldemort did something Harry had not predicted. He turned to his assembled Death Eaters and said, with complete calm, "Kill everyone else. Leave him to me." And the battle exploded. It came from every direction at once, Death Eaters surging toward the castle doors, students and Order members flooding out to meet them, the night fracturing into 1,000 individual duels and screams and flashes of light. Harry was moving before the first spells crossed, putting himself between a cluster of Death Eaters and a group of 5th years who'd come boiling out of the entrance hall with wands up and terror on their faces and the specific reckless courage of people who hadn't yet been hurt enough to know what the worst looked like. He put 4 Death Eaters down in the first 10 seconds. Clean, precise, no hesitation. The first 2 with a shield reversal that sent their own curses back with double the force. The third with a binding hex that wrapped him from ankle to shoulder and planted him face first in the grass. The fourth, who'd started casting the Cruciatus, Harry disarmed with a gesture so casual it looked almost contemptuous, then put him into an enforced sleep with a stupefy that hit like a freight train. The 5th years were staring at him. "Castle," he said. "Now. Find the day. Stay with them." They ran. He turned. The grounds were chaos in every direction, but Harry moved through it the way water moves through a landscape, finding the path of most efficiency, not the path of least resistance. He could track the positions of everyone within a 50-meter radius with a precision that still felt new and startling, could feel the distress signals of people he cared about like tugs on a string. Ron was 60 meters to his left, inside the entrance hall, back against a wall and taking on 3 Death Eaters at once with the battered wand he'd been using since 5th year. Harry felt the particular quality of Ron Weasley in a fight, stubborn and instinctive and good, much better than he gave himself credit for, but one of those 3 Death Eaters was Yaxley and Yaxley was professional in a way that was going to create problems very shortly. Harry threw a disarming charm across 60 meters of open battle without breaking stride. Yaxley's wand snapped out of his hand with enough force to embed it 3 inches into the stone wall. Ron's head came up and his eyes found Harry across the chaos. The expression on his face started as relief and moved into something complicated, something that said you're different without saying it out loud. Harry gave him a nod. "Deal with the other 2. Ron turned back to the fight, the complicated expression folding itself away into the business of staying alive. Hermione was in the Great Hall, and she was fine, not just fine but excellent, cutting through 2 Death Eaters with a combination of spells so precisely sequenced that it would have made the Auror Training Division look twice. her face white and furious and completely determined. He felt her register his presence even across the distance, felt that specific Hermione awareness that had always operated like a radar, and felt also the particular quality of what she was feeling right now, which was a kind of grief and a kind of joy tangled up together into something that would probably take her 2 days to unpack. He'd have to be there when she did. But first, he turned back to where Voldemort was standing in the center of the grounds and found the man watching him with those calculating red eyes while the battle raged around them both. "You've been tracking everyone," Voldemort said. "Every person on this battlefield. You're aware of all of them." "Yes," Harry said. "That's new." "Everything's new," Harry said. "How long have you known about the bindings?" A pause. Something moved in Voldemort's face, not shame. Tom Riddle had excised shame from his emotional vocabulary decades ago, but something adjacent. The discomfort of a man forced to acknowledge he had not been in full possession of the facts. "I knew you were bound," he said. "I did not know the extent. Did you put any of them there?" "2," Voldemort said, with a directness that was almost strange, but then, Harry had noticed this about him before, the particular dark honesty of a man who considered himself beyond the need for deception. "Through our connection. To keep you," he paused. Selected a word. "Manageable." "You and Dumbledore had that in common," Harry said. The flicker in Voldemort's expression was small and quick and, Harry thought, involuntary. He filed it away. "You should understand," Voldemort said, and he took a step forward, and the Elder Wand came up slowly and deliberately, "that whatever you have become tonight, whatever the curse released in you, it changes nothing essential. You are one. I have prepared for 60 years. You've prepared to fight the boy Dumbledore built," Harry said. "That boy is gone. Then I'll learn to fight the one in front of me." "All right," Harry said. And raised his wand. For miles away, on the outskirts of Hogsmeade, a man in a long dark coat with a shield field kit in a rucksack and the particular bearing of someone who had walked into dangerous places professionally for 30 years watched the light show from the hill with a small pair of military-grade binoculars and said nothing at all. Phil Coulson had been Fury's advance man in Britain for 3 years. He had documentation that identified him as a cultural attaché for the American Embassy, a flat in Edinburgh that he actually lived in, and a level of operational familiarity with the British magical world that his file didn't entirely reflect. He'd cultivated contacts. Attended ministry functions undercover. Read, with the patient systematic thoroughness of a man who enjoyed research, everything S.H.I.E.L.D. had ever gathered on magical Britain. He had a personal file on Harry Potter that ran to 62 pages. He was currently revising his assumptions about most of it. The castle on the hill was lit up like a thunderstorm, spellfire in every color, flashes of light from a dozen windows, figures moving across the grounds in patterns that the binoculars couldn't quite resolve into sense but that registered as a battle of extraordinary scale. The center of it, the two figures moving around each other in the fire-lit open ground, was the part he couldn't look away from. He had a comms earpiece in his left ear. Fury's voice came through it. "What are you seeing?" "Confirmation of the sensors," Coulson said. He's running point on a battle with 100 Death Eaters while simultaneously engaging a target that our files classify as one of the 5 most powerful magic users in recorded British history." He paused. "He's not struggling." "No," Fury said. "He's not. The interesting part is that he's not going all out," Coulson said, leaning into the binoculars. "He has the capacity to end this much faster. I can tell. It's like watching someone deliberately not run." "He's protecting people," Fury said. "Yes. What does that tell you?" Coulson lowered the binoculars. He thought about 62 pages of reports. He thought about a boy who had walked into a haunted maze at 14, who had sat with his godfather on a rooftop and talked about fear, who had broken into a government facility to rescue hostages at 15, who had buried people he loved and kept going with a steadiness that had always read as repression in the reports but that now he was reconsidering, maybe it hadn't been repression. Maybe it had just been faith. Faith that the next step was worth taking, even when the evidence was genuinely ambiguous. It tells me, Coulson said, that whoever Dumbledore was trying to build, the actual person is considerably more complicated. Silence from the earpiece. And considerably more interesting, Coulson added. Get closer, Fury said. I want eyes on his face when it's done. Define done. When Voldemort's dealt with, Fury said, matter of fact, the way he said everything. Coulson put the binoculars away and started moving down the hill toward Hogsmeade. Voldemort's first real attack came like a winter storm, no warning, no preamble, just force. 3 curses in sequence, the last of which was the killing curse, and the sequence was designed so that the first 2 were interesting enough to require active attention while the third came from a slightly different angle. It was a technique that had worked on better prepared opponents than a 17-year-old boy. Harry tracked all 3 simultaneously and dealt with them in order without taking a step. The first he deflected with a conjured barrier that materialized and dissolved in a single breath. The second he redirected, sent it spinning sideways into a section of empty ground where it exploded in a crater of scorched earth. The third, the green light, again, he moved for, not away from, letting it pass so close to his shoulder that it grazed the fabric of his jacket. He felt it. The killing curse, even at near-miss distance, was a cold thing, not painful, just absolute. The intention of it was so complete it had a physical quality. The intention of stopping. Of canceling a life the way you cancel a debt. You keep missing, Harry said. You keep moving, Voldemort said, and there was something new in his voice. Something Harry identified, after a moment, as respect. The cold, reluctant, strategic kind. How are you tracking them? All 3 simultaneously, that's not reflexive, you're not reacting, you're anticipating. I can feel your intent, Harry said. Before you cast. The magic builds, and I can feel it. That's not possible. And yet, Harry said. Voldemort went still. Thinking again. Harry let him. It was always better to fight a thinker when they were thinking, because a thinker who was caught in a calculation couldn't be fully committed to the fight. The battle raged on around them and Harry kept the split awareness going, kept tracking the people he needed to track, felt Ron move into a position of comparative safety, felt Hermione put down her 4th opponent with a precision that deserved applause, felt, and this made his chest tight, Neville somewhere to his right, back on his feet, sword in hand, and a cold clarity of purpose coming off him. The snake, Harry said, not to Voldemort but out loud, almost to himself. Voldemort's expression shifted. Harry saw it, the instinctive tightening, the thing he was trying to control. Nagini, Harry said, and turned and looked directly at where the snake was. He could feel her, the dark cold intelligence of her, the Horcrux energy he recognized now with absolute certainty, and she was moving toward Neville from the left, emerging from behind a ruined section of wall, and Neville hadn't seen her yet. Neville! Harry shouted. What happened next was one of those moments that doesn't need embellishment because the truth of it is already extraordinary. Neville Longbottom, who had grown up told he was barely capable, who had spent 6 years convinced he was the nearly ran of Gryffindor's generation, turned toward Harry's voice with the sword of Gryffindor already moving, a single arc, clean and committed, the blade catching the firelight, and Nagini's head separated from her body while she was still in the air. The sound that came out of Voldemort was not a scream. It was something older and darker than a scream, the specific sound of a man feeling a piece of himself die, which was literally what was happening. The last Horcrux, gone. He staggered, actually physically staggered, the first purely involuntary movement Harry had ever seen from him, and his hand went to his chest and his face did something complicated and terrible. He looked, for just a moment, like Tom Riddle. Not Lord Voldemort. Not the Dark Lord. Tom Riddle, the boy who had been afraid of death and had tried to unmake it and had paid every conceivable price for the attempt. Harry saw it clearly, with the clarity that had replaced all the old murk and noise, and he felt something in his chest that wasn't triumph. It was closer to grief. "It's over, Tom," he said. Voldemort raised his head. The red eyes found Harry, and the moment of Thomas Riddle vanished back behind them like a door shutting. "Nothing," he said, "is over." He cast 7 spells in under 2 seconds. It was the most technically impressive piece of offensive magic Harry had ever seen, a layered barrage that would have needed 3 fully trained aurors to unpack in real time, each spell designed to intersect with the other's trajectories and create overlapping fields of effect. Harry moved through it. Not perfectly. One hit him, a cutting curse that opened a gash along his forearm that burned white-hot for a moment before the new depth of his magic sealed it without him consciously deciding to. He didn't look at it. He was already inside Voldemort's guard, 3 meters away and closing, and he could see the exact shape of what he needed to do. "Expelliarmus," he said. Simple. Old. The first real spell he'd ever been proud of casting. The spell that Hermione had once told him wasn't sophisticated enough and that he'd used anyway because it was his and it worked and it was honest. It wasn't a killing curse, wasn't a bone breaker, wasn't anything that tried to do more damage than necessary. It just said stop. The Elder Wand left Voldemort's hand. It turned in the air, the long spinning arc Harry had expected from his understanding of it, the wand returning to its true master, the whole chain of ownership resolving in a single clean moment, and landed in his right hand. He held it for a second. Voldemort stood wandless. Around them, the battle was slowing, Death Eaters registering something wrong, students and Order members registering something different, the whole vast violent thing losing momentum as the center of it changed. Harry looked at the Elder Wand. Then he snapped it. He did it without ceremony, without a speech, without looking at Voldemort for a reaction. He just snapped it in half over his knee and let the pieces fall, because the Elder Wand was a thing that had caused enough damage and its chain of ownership ended here. He had his own wand. "That was the Death Stick," Voldemort said, and his voice was very controlled and very strange. "I know what it was," Harry said. "You could have, I know what I could have done with it," Harry said. "I'm not interested." Voldemort looked at him. Wandless, the last Horcrux destroyed, the immortality he'd built his entire existence around stripped away, and the expression on his face was the most human thing Harry had ever seen from him, a kind of bewildered, furious incomprehension. Not at losing. At what he was losing to. Not power. Not a superior strategy. Not someone who wanted what he wanted, only more. Someone who simply didn't want any of what he had. "You're not afraid of me," Voldemort said. "I was," Harry said. "For a long time. You did an excellent job of being frightening." He raised his own wand, his original wand, 11 inches, holly and phoenix feather, the twin to the broken stick on the ground. "I'm not anymore." "Then what are you?" "Tired," Harry said, honestly. "Tired of this particular problem." He cast. The curse that ended Tom Riddle was not the killing curse. Harry had thought about it, in the split-second clarity of the moment, and decided he was not interested in becoming the kind of person who killed with the killing curse. What he cast instead was a binding, but not any binding in the standard British magical repertoire. It came from somewhere deeper, from whatever the forest and the liberation and the night had unlocked in him, and it hit Voldemort with the same absolute certainty that Voldemort's killing curse had hit Harry. It wasn't permanent. He hadn't meant it to be permanent. That wasn't his decision to make alone. What it did was strip Tom Riddle of his magic. Completely. Totally. Down to nothing. It was possible, theoretically, in the ancient texts, in the kinds of magic that the Ministry had classified as too dangerous to study, but it had never been done to a living person because the level of power required was beyond what anyone in a generation had possessed. Now someone possessed it, and he used it, and the thing that was Lord Voldemort collapsed to his knees on the grass of Hogwarts like a building with its foundations removed and made the specific sound of a man who has just had every conviction of his life disproven in a single moment. He was not dead. Harry had made that choice deliberately. Death was easy. Death was what Voldemort had feared and run from for 60 years. Making Tom Riddle live as a baseline human being, an old man, mortal, with no power and no followers and nothing left of the architecture of terror he'd built, seemed, to Harry, like the more honest punishment. And the more honest mercy. He hadn't decided yet which it was. Maybe both. The silence that followed was vast. The battle had stopped. Entirely, completely, it had guttered out across the grounds and the castle like a fire suddenly deprived of oxygen, Death Eaters dropping their wands or running or standing frozen with the particular paralysis of people whose organizing principle has just been removed. Order members and students were scattered across the grounds and the entrance hall in various states of exhaustion and injury and, in some cases, a grief that Harry could feel from here and that he would sit with later, when the immediate business was done. He walked over to where Ron had come out of the entrance hall and was standing with Hermione, both of them bloody and disheveled and staring at him with expressions that contained several things at once. Ron spoke first. "Mate," he said. "What?" "Later," Harry said. "That was, you just, later, Ron." Hermione stepped forward. She looked at him with those eyes that had always seen more of him than anyone else, that had always looked past the surface and found whatever was actually there, and what was on her face now was not awe, it was something simpler and more private. Relief. The specific kind that comes after years of being afraid, not for yourself but for someone else. She hugged him. He held on. He pressed his face against the top of her head and breathed and let the noise of the aftermath wash over him, people calling names, people crying, the distant sounds of captured Death Eaters being organized, and felt, for the first time in as long as he could remember, that he was standing on solid ground. "You walked into that forest to die," she said, against his shoulder, and her voice was steady but barely. "It worked out," he said. "Harry, I know," he said. "I'll explain everything. I promise." He felt her exhale. Felt Ron's hand land on his shoulder, heavy, familiar, exactly Ron. He looked up at the castle. Hogwarts rose against the early grey light of pre-dawn, battered and scarred in places, windows broken, sections of wall crumbled, but fundamentally still standing in the way it had always stood, stubbornly, magnificently, like it was personally offended by the suggestion that it could be knocked down. He felt it looking back at him. Something in the castle's ancient magic settled, deep and slow, like a breath let out after a long holding. Like it had been waiting for this exact outcome and was now, finally, satisfied. "People are going to want a statement," Ron said, after a moment. "I know. The Ministry people that survived are already, I know, Ron. And the Order, Ron." "Right," Ron said. "Later." Coulson reached the edge of the Hogwarts grounds just as the battle ended. He'd moved fast through the sleeping streets of Hogsmeade, closed up, empty, the locals with enough sense to be inside and away from windows on a night like this, and picked his way along the road toward the castle through the receding dark. He had a magical detection device the size and shape of a mobile phone in his breast pocket that was currently showing readings that would, if he brought them back to the Astrophysics Division, constitute a publishable paper. He didn't go through the gates. He stood at the edge of the road and looked up at the castle and watched, through a gap in the grounds wall, as three figures stood together in the grey pre-dawn and held onto each other with the particular posture of people who had survived something they'd expected not to. He pulled out his phone, the regular one, not the sensor, and called Fury. "It's done," he said. "Voldemort?" "Alive," Coulson said. "Apparently." But, he paused, watching Harry Potter pull back from the hug and look up at the castle with an expression Coulson couldn't quite read from this distance but that looked, from here, like someone seeing a thing clearly for the first time. "Sir. He didn't kill him." Silence on the line. "He stripped his powers," Coulson said. "I don't know how. I don't think it's supposed to be possible. But Tom Riddle is on the ground over there without a drop of magic left in him." More silence. "He chose not to kill him," Coulson said, and there was something in his voice that surprised him when he heard it, a kind of wondering. "A 17-year-old kid who just found out he's been chained down his whole life, who walked into those woods to die an hour ago, who had every reason to, he chose not to." Fury's voice, when it came, was very dry. You like him? I have a file on him, sir, Coulson said. 62 pages. You like him? Coulson watched Harry Potter turn from the castle and say something to his friends that made Ron Weasley laugh, a real laugh, startled out of him, incredulous, and Hermione put her face in her hands with a sound that was either crying or laughing or both at the same time. He's interesting, Coulson said. Everyone I care about is interesting, Fury said. What's his status? Injured? Minor laceration on his right forearm. Otherwise he looks fine. Coulson paused. Suspiciously fine, honestly, for someone who took a killing curse to the chest an hour ago. Welcome to my world, Fury said. Don't approach him yet. Keep eyes on. I land at Edinburgh in 4 hours. And then? And then, Fury said, we have a conversation with the most powerful magic user on the planet and see if he has any interest in a job. Coulson put the phone in his pocket. Up at the castle, early light was breaking over the parapets, thin, grey, October dawn light that turned everything the color of pewter and made the grounds look, for a moment, almost peaceful. Students were coming out of the entrance hall in 2s and 3s. The injured were being moved. Someone had conjured floating stretchers and they moved across the grounds in a sad quiet procession that made Coulson look away for a moment. He looked back at Harry Potter. The boy was watching the stretchers too. Standing very still, his wand back in his pocket, Ron and Hermione flanking him, and the expression on his face was not the expression Coulson would have expected, not relief or triumph or the dazed vacancy of someone in shock. It was grief, straightforward and awake and fully present. He wasn't pushing it away. He was looking directly at it. 62 pages, Coulson thought, and I still got him wrong. He found a stone wall to lean against and settled in to wait for Fury. Inside the castle, in a corridor off the great hall where the injured had been laid in rows, Madame Pomfrey moved with that particular frantic efficiency of hers that had been treating Hogwarts students for 30 years and would apparently keep doing so through any catastrophe the universe cared to produce. She was not surprised by anything. She was also, behind the professional mask, absolutely exhausted and visibly holding herself together with the same iron will she brought to everything. Harry found her there when he came in from the grounds. She looked at him. His arm. Then back at his face. Sit, she said. He sat on the edge of a cot. She took his arm, cleaned the gash with a practiced efficiency, applied dittany. Her hands were steady. He watched her face. I'm going to ask you one question, she said, not looking up from his arm, and I want an honest answer. All right, he said. Are you hurt? She glanced up. Not physically. Actually hurt. He held her gaze for a moment. I will be, he said. Later. She nodded, the firm single nod of someone who had given and received enough honesty to recognize it. When later comes, she said, you'll come find me or you'll find Miss Granger or someone else who loves you, and you won't try to manage it alone. She pressed the last of the dittany into the cut and it sealed clean. That's not a request. No, Harry agreed. It's not. He looked at the rows of injured around them. Who are we missing? She hesitated. Listed them, quietly, specifically, the way you say names you've been carrying all night. Fred Weasley. Remus Lupin. Nymphadora Tonks. Others. Each name landed in Harry's chest like something physical. He closed his eyes for 3 seconds. Let each one land. Did not push them away. Then he opened his eyes and stood up. Thank you, he said. She waved a hand that dismissed the thanks and simultaneously meant of course. He moved back toward the great hall. Fred. The name stayed with him, a weight he would carry for a long time. Fred Weasley, who had laughed at everything, who had made the darkness smaller just by existing in it, who had, and this was the part that was going to take Harry a long time, died in a world where a 17-year-old boy still had 98 bindings on him that made him manageable. Might things have been different if the bindings had never been there? If Harry had come into himself earlier, faster, with the full weight of what he was? He didn't know. He wouldn't know. That particular grief would have teeth for a long time. He walked into the great hall. Ron was with his family in the corner, the whole remaining cluster of Weasleys gathered around something Harry couldn't see from here, and the quality of the grief coming from that corner was so specific and so human that he gave them their distance. He'd go to Ron later. He'd sit with him and not say anything useful, and that would be the right thing. He found Neville by the windows. Neville was still holding the sword. He hadn't cleaned it yet. He was looking out at the grounds with the expression of a man who had just done the thing he was born to do and was now experiencing the full weight of what that meant, not pride exactly, more a kind of solemn recognition. Harry sat beside him on the window ledge. "You heard me," Neville said. "You were already turning," Harry said. "I just made sure." Neville looked at the sword. "My Gran's going to have opinions about all of this." "Your Gran can handle it," Harry said. "So can you." Neville looked at him. "You're different," he said, the same way Ron had said it but quieter, with less confusion and more simple observation, in the way Neville had always been quietly accurate about things. What happened in the forest? Harry thought about how to answer that. About the white light and the chains breaking and the Dumbledore who had been ashamed and the Tom Riddle who had been afraid, and about lying on the cold ground and feeling himself for the first time. "I found out who I actually am," he said. Neville was quiet for a moment. "Then, is it good? Who you actually are?" Harry looked out the window at the grey morning light coming up over the lake, over the grounds, over a castle that was still standing. "I think so," he said. "Yeah." Outside, unnoticed by anyone in the great hall, a man in a dark coat with a shield field sensor reading off the charts in his breast pocket was making his way around the perimeter of the grounds, looking for the best angle, taking notes in a small leather journal that had no identifying marks on the cover. And in Edinburgh, a plane was landing. Chapter 3, The Architecture of Betrayal. The Ministry arrived at 9 in the morning. 3 senior Aurors, 2 Wisengamot representatives, and a man named Thickness who had technically been Minister for Magic until approximately 6 hours ago when the Imperious Curse broke and left him standing in the middle of the atrium with no memory of the last several months and a headache that was, by all accounts, spectacular. They came through the gates in a cluster with the particular energy of people who had arrived after the crisis to claim credit for the resolution, official robes, nervous wands, the practiced expressions of institutional authority trying to reassert itself over a situation it had not, in any meaningful sense, been part of. Harry watched them come up the drive from the window of McGonagall's office. McGonagall was behind her desk, Dumbledore's desk, technically, which she had not yet sat behind but was standing near with the air of someone getting used to a new weight. She'd been headmistress for approximately 40 minutes and had already reorganized 3 things and sent 6 owls and was currently working through her 4th cup of tea with the focused efficiency of a woman who processed difficulty through action. "They'll want a statement," she said. "They'll want to take credit," Harry said. "Yes," she said. "Those are not mutually exclusive." Harry turned from the window. "I want to see Dumbledore's records." McGonagall looked at him. Her expression was the one she used when she was making a rapid and accurate assessment of something she hadn't previously considered, eyes sharp, chin up, the particular quality of a formidable intelligence in active motion. "Which records?" "All of them," he said. "Everything related to me specifically. The bindings, the wards, the prophecy, all of it." He held her gaze. "I think you know what I'm talking about." A silence. Outside, the ministry delegation was crossing the grounds. Below them, Harry could hear the sounds of the castle beginning to recover from the night, quiet voices, the careful movements of people who hadn't yet decided whether it was safe to be loud again. "Some of those records are sealed under his personal enchantments," McGonagall said carefully. "I know," Harry said. "They won't be sealed from me. Not anymore." McGonagall looked at him for a long moment. He met her look steadily, without challenge and without apology, just waiting, the way you wait for someone you respect to finish making a decision you're confident they'll make correctly. She opened the left-hand drawer of the desk and removed a heavy iron key. "The private archive," she said. "Below the headmaster's tower. Third door on the left." She set the key on the desk between them. "I'll handle the ministry. Tell them I'll give a statement this afternoon," Harry said, picking up the key. "Tell them I need a few hours. And if they insist on speaking with you immediately, tell them to insist more quietly," Harry said, "and I'll still need a few hours." Something happened at the corner of McGonagall's mouth that wasn't quite a smile but was clearly its close relative. She picked up her tea. "Go," she said. Hermione found him in the archive 20 minutes later. She didn't look surprised to find him there, of course she didn't. She'd been looking for him since the Great Hall, and this was exactly the place a person went when they wanted to understand something that had been done to them. She had a bruise across her cheekbone from a glancing stunner she'd taken in the corridor fight, and her hair was doing several things at once, and she'd changed into fresh robes that were already gaining a slight dishevelment from the energy she moved with. She stopped in the doorway and looked at the files spread across the table. "Oh," she said quietly. "Sit down," Harry said. She sat. She looked at the file nearest to her, a thick folder with a ministry classification stamp and Dumbledore's personal seal and Harry's name on the tab. She looked at Harry. He nodded. She opened it. The silence that followed was the specific silence of someone reading something that confirms a fear they'd had for a long time and had hoped was wrong. Hermione read quickly, she always read quickly, but she turned each page slowly, the way you turn pages when you're trying to give yourself time to process what the words actually mean before you encounter the next set of words. Harry let her read. He was going through a different file, the one labeled Binding Architecture, HJP, Authorized Installations, and the contents were exactly what he'd suspected and worse than he'd been able to articulate. Each binding documented with clinical precision, the date of installation, the caster, the purpose, the intended duration. Some had been placed at his birth, by whom was a question the file answered obliquely, referring to agreements made with Dumbledore and the concerned parties and long-term strategic necessities. Some had been placed when he was 4 years old. He sat with that for a moment. 4 years old. Whatever power he'd been showing by then, whatever a 4-year-old with his capacity had accidentally done, wandless, without framework or training, had been enough that someone had decided it needed to be addressed. He didn't feel angry about it. He was past the first wave of anger, had processed it somewhere in the forest and in the white light between life and death, and what was left was something colder and more useful. Understanding. He wanted to understand the shape of it completely before he decided what to do with the understanding. "Harry," Hermione said. He looked up. She was holding a piece of parchment. Her hand was not quite steady. "This one," she said, and her voice was doing the careful controlled thing it did when she was containing something large. "This binding, the one installed in your first year." She set it down on the table between them. "It says it was placed to prevent the development of advanced legilimency and occlumency before appropriate supervision could be established." She looked at him. "He blocked your mind magic. Before you'd ever had a lesson. Before you'd ever had the chance to," she stopped. "He blocked it so Voldemort could still access you." Harry looked at the document. The handwriting was Dumbledore's, that distinctive, slightly archaic script he knew from 100 notes and letters. "So the connection would stay viable," Harry said. "He needed Voldemort to be able to reach me. For the Horcrux. For the plan." "You were the plan," Hermione said, and the control slipped slightly on the last word, a crack in it. "From the beginning. The whole, the Horcrux in your scar, walking into the forest, all of it, it was all designed," Harry said. "You were 11, she said. "You were 11 years old and he already knew, and he let you walk around carrying that piece of Voldemort's soul, and he thought it was necessary," Harry said. It wasn't necessary, Hermione said, and now the control was just gone, she wasn't bothering with it. She was furious, a clean, bright, intellectual fury of the kind that Hermione Granger deployed when she encountered a wrong that had been dressed up as a right. He could have, there were options, Harry, there are always options, and he chose the one where a child spends 17 years as a container, as a vessel for someone else's plan and never once got to. She stopped herself. Breathed. I know, Harry said. Are you angry? She said. He thought about it honestly. I was. In the forest, there's a place you go, when the curse hits. A kind of between place. He was there. He looked at the file. I told him what I thought. He didn't really argue. Hermione looked at him. What did he say? That he was sorry. Harry turned a page in the file. I think he was. I think he was also convinced, genuinely, completely convinced, that it was the only way. That the ends justified it. He found the page he was looking for and read it for a moment. That's the part one finds hardest to be angry about. Not the plan. The certainty. He never once questioned whether the plan was right because he was so sure he knew the shape of the future. That's the most dangerous kind of person, Hermione said, quietly now, the fury settling into something sadder. Yes, Harry said. I know some others like that. He turned the file around and pointed to an entry near the bottom of the page, a list of individuals who had been consulted on the binding architecture or who had knowledge of its full scope. Hermione leaned in and read. Her eyebrows went up. The list was not long, 5 names. Dumbledore. Someone whose name was redacted. A healer from St. Mungo's. And Severus Snape, annotated with primary maintenance oversight, annual review. He maintained them, Harry said. Every year. Snape. Hermione sat back. He knew all of it. All of it, Harry said. The Horcrux in my scar. The plan to send me into the forest. The specific nature of every binding. He was the architect's foreman. The one who actually did the groundwork while Dumbledore made the plans. And still, Hermione began. Died for it, Harry said. Yes. He closed the file. The question is what he thought he was doing. You don't think he was just following orders? Harry shook his head. Snape spent 20 years undercover in Voldemort's inner circle. He was the best Occlumens alive. He had more control over his choices than almost anyone I can think of. When Snape did something, it was because Snape decided to do it. He stood, walked to the end of the archive, looked at the shelf of further files. He chose it. The question is what he was choosing for. Hermione was quiet. Harry pulled another file, labeled simply SS in Dumbledore's handwriting. Harry, Hermione said. Is that? Yes, he said, and brought it back to the table. 2 floors above them, in the hospital wing, Severus Snape was not dead. This had been a surprise to everyone, including Snape himself. The venom from Nagini's bite should have killed him within minutes, it had certainly been designed to, had done so with dependable efficiency on every other victim, but the particular potions regimen that Snape had been quietly maintaining for 2 years, prepared in the understanding that his proximity to Voldemort's snake made this outcome increasingly probable, had slowed the cellular deterioration enough for Madame Pomfrey to get to him with an antivenom that she developed in theoretical form and had never expected to actually need to use. He was awake. He was furious about being awake, in the specific way of a man who had arrived at peace with a particular ending and was now forced to recalibrate. He was also in considerable pain, which he was managing with potions master stoicism and the expression of a man who found the entire situation personally offensive. Madame Pomfrey had told him he had visitors. He had said he did not want visitors. She had said that was very sad and that she would send them in at noon. He was currently staring at the ceiling with the resigned expression of a man calculating how long it would take him to recover enough to leave under his own power. The door opened at 11:10. Harry came in alone. Snape's eyes moved from the ceiling to the door without moving anything else. His expression didn't change. Harry crossed the hospital wing at an unhurried pace and sat in the chair beside the bed and looked at Snape the way he'd looked at Voldemort in the clearing last night, directly, without fear, but also without the old rage. The old rage was gone. He'd felt it go somewhere in the forest and hadn't missed it. "You should be resting," Snape said. His voice was rough, the venom still wearing on his vocal cords. "So should you," Harry said. Snape looked at him. A long, careful assessment, and Harry felt it now, the legitimacy probe, the light professional touch of it, and he let Snape look. Not because he couldn't stop it. He could stop it effortlessly now, and Snape would know that immediately. He let it proceed because he had nothing to hide and because he wanted Snape to see that. Snape's expression shifted, fractionally. "You've read the files," Snape said. "Yes. All of them." "Getting there," Harry said. "I read yours." Silence. The hospital wing was quiet around them, most patients sleeping or dazed, Madame Pomfrey at the far end dealing with something. "Then you know everything," Snape said. "I know the facts," Harry said. "I want to understand the reasoning." Snape looked at the ceiling again. "The reasoning," he said, in a voice that had something complicated moving under its flat surface, "is the province of a dead man. You should speak to his portrait." "I'd rather speak to you," Harry said. "You were there. You made the choices. The portrait will tell me what Dumbledore decided to remember about himself. You'll tell me what actually happened." Another silence. Snape's jaw worked slightly, the involuntary movement of a man sitting with something large. "What specifically," he said, "do you want to know?" "Why you maintained the bindings," Harry said. "Specifically." "Not because Dumbledore asked you to. Why you chose to." Snape was quiet for long enough that Harry thought he wouldn't answer. "Then, because I believed, I was told, and I chose to believe, that your power, fully unbound at an early age, would make you a target of a different kind. That the Ministry, the old families, every institutional force in the wizarding world would have seen an 11-year-old with that signature and responded accordingly." He paused. "I have seen what they do to threats. I was one, for long enough to know." "So you were protecting me," Harry said. "I was managing a variable," Snape said, and the roughness in his voice wasn't just the venom. "The way Dumbledore managed variables. He managed everything. Every piece on the board." He looked at Harry. "Including you. Especially you." "And you," Harry said. "He managed you too." Snape's expression didn't change. "Masterfully," he said, and there was a bitterness in it so old and so integrated it was barely distinguishable from his normal tone. Harry leaned forward slightly. "The memories you gave me," he said. "In the shack. The ones that explained the plan. The ones that showed me what I had to do." He paused. "Those weren't just instructions. Were they?" Snape was very still. "You knew I'd survive," Harry said. "If the bindings held, if I went into the forest as I was, bound and limited, maybe not. Maybe that was just hope. But you gave me those memories knowing I'd understand them after. Knowing that if I understood what Dumbledore had done, I'd have the context to make a real choice." He held Snape's gaze. "You wanted me to see the whole picture. Not the version Dumbledore curated. The actual architecture." Snape said nothing. "That's why you included the files," Harry said. "In the memories. The binding documentation. Most people wouldn't have recognized it for what it was. But you knew I'd see it once the bindings were gone, once I could feel what I'd been missing." The silence stretched. "You have an irritating habit," Snape said finally, "of understanding things correctly." "Was it Lily?" Harry said. The direct question, the one that had always been there. "The whole thing," your side of it, was it all about her? Snape looked at the ceiling. It began that way, he said, after a long time. It became, he stopped. She would not have wanted this, he said. What was done to you? She trusted Dumbledore. She trusted his judgment. If she had known the full extent, he stopped again. She would have fought it, Harry said. She would have burned the files, Snape said, and something happened in his face that was more naked than anything Harry had ever seen from him, a flash of grief so old it had become structural, part of the load-bearing wall of him. Harry sat with that for a moment. I'm going to do something about it, he said. The bindings are gone now and I don't plan to let anything like that happen again. To me or anyone else. He stood. I thought you should know. And what is it you plan to do, precisely? Snape said, the professional cool back in place but thinner now, worn down. I'm going to change some things, Harry said. The Ministry. The way we handle power. The way the magical world responds to people who are different from what it expects. He picked up the chair, moved it back to its original position with the particular neatness of someone thinking about something else. I'm also going to make sure the people responsible for the binding program are held accountable. The living ones. The name that was redacted, Snape said, and it wasn't a question. Yes, Harry said. Snape was quiet. Then, Alpheus Doge. He was on the original committee. He recommended you to the program in 1981 as an infant. He met Harry's eyes. He is currently a senior advisor to the Wizengamot. Harry nodded. Filed it. Thank you, he said. He was almost at the door when Snape spoke again. Potter. The name came out like it always had, but there was something different in it. Something that had been stripped of a particular armor. What you did last night. Stripping his magic rather than killing him. A pause. Your mother would have approved. Harry stopped with his hand on the door. He didn't turn around. He stayed there for a moment, facing the door, and let the words land. I know, he said. And walked out. The Ministry delegation found him in the Great Hall at 1 in the afternoon. They came in with their official expressions arranged and their prepared speeches ready. Harry could feel the shape of what they intended before the senior Auror, a broad-shouldered man named Williamson, got his first 3 words out. Gratitude, authority, management. The standard post-crisis institutional reboot. Thank you for your service, here's our plan, please step aside now while we take it from here. Harry sat at the Gryffindor table with a plate of food he'd barely touched and looked at them as they arranged themselves across the table, and he thought about 98 bindings and a 4-year-old in a file and Alpheus Doge. Mr. Potter, Williamson said. On behalf of the Ministry of Magic, sit down, Harry said pleasantly. Williamson blinked. I beg your pardon. There are benches, Harry said. Please sit down. I'd rather talk than be addressed. A beat of silence. The 2 Wizengamot representatives exchanged a glance. Then, with the slightly stunned compliance of people who had prepared for many possible scenarios and not this one, they sat. We want to begin, Williamson said, slightly recalibrated, by acknowledging the extraordinary service. I need you to issue arrest warrants, Harry said. Today. Before you leave the grounds. Silence. For the following individuals, Harry said, and he produced a list from his pocket, 3 names on it, including Alpheus Doge, and slid it across the table. These people were part of a program that illegally bound a minor without the minor's knowledge or consent, using Ministry authority to suppress what the documentation describes as a dangerous power signature. The program was unauthorized under 7 separate provisions of the Magical Rights Charter of 1703, which I suspect most of your current legal department has never read but which is still, technically, binding law. Williamson picked up the list. Read it. Put it down. These are very serious allegations. I have documentation, Harry said. 43 pages of it, all with Ministry stamps and signatures. Miss Granger has copies. He glanced sideways. Hermione was at the end of the table with an expression of profound professional satisfaction, a stack of parchment in front of her. She made several, she said helpfully. The Wizengamot representative on the left, a small, angular woman named Greengrass that Harry didn't recognize, was reading the list with an expression that suggested she was making very rapid calculations. Mr. Potter, she said carefully. You understand that some of these names are, I understand exactly what they are, Harry said. Issue the warrants. The process for something like this would normally involve, issue the warrants today, Harry said, or I will stand on these grounds this evening and explain to every journalist in Britain exactly what the program was, who ran it, what it did to me, and why the ministry sat on the documentation instead of acting. He looked at her pleasantly. I've been told I'm quite compelling when I explain things. This seems like a good day to find out. The silence that followed had a different quality than the earlier silence. It was the silence of people realizing they were in a negotiation they hadn't prepared for. The warrants, Williamson said slowly, would need to be approved by the acting minister, Harry said. Who is currently whoever the Wizengamot appoints in the next 24 hours, since Thickness was under an imperious curse for the past year and his decisions during that period are legally void. He paused. I'd recommend Madam Bones, if she's available. She's been consistent about doing the right thing at personal cost, which is rarer than it should be. Greengrass was looking at him with an expression that had moved past calculation into something closer to respect. You've thought about this, she said. I had a long night, Harry said. Ron appeared at his shoulder while the ministry group was still in the process of leaving, Williamson talking in a low urgent voice to the person on his left, Greengrass making notes on a piece of parchment with the focused intensity of someone who was adjusting a long-term strategy. Ron sat down beside him and stole a piece of bread from his plate. Harry let him. They sat in silence for a moment, which was one of the good things about Ron. He understood the value of silence, had never been the person to fill it with noise just because it was there. You all right? Harry said. No, Ron said, without any particular emphasis. Just the honest answer. Me neither, Harry said. Ron chewed the bread. Looked at the table. Fred would have loved that, he said. Nodded toward the retreating ministry delegation. The way you just, he made a gesture. He'd have been insufferable about it. In the good way. I know, Harry said. Mum wants to see you, Ron said. When you're ready. No rush. He stopped. She was out there last night and she saw, he stopped again. I'll go see her, Harry said. Now, if she wants. Ron shook his head. Later. She's sleeping. She hasn't slept yet, Percy's sitting with her. He stole another piece of bread. George is, he didn't finish. He didn't need to. Harry put his hand on Ron's shoulder. Didn't say anything. Ron leaned sideways, briefly, the way he had since they were 11, the specific Ron Weasley gesture of receiving comfort without making it into a production. Dad keeps saying Fred would want us to, you know, Ron said. And he's right. Dad's always right about that kind of thing, he just says it at the worst possible times. Arthur Weasley is right about most things, Harry said. Don't tell him that, Ron said. He'll never stop. Harry laughed. Actually laughed, surprised out of it, the way you always were with Ron, and it felt strange and good and necessary, the specific relief of laughing in the middle of something terrible, not because the terrible thing is less terrible but because you're still alive and the person next to you is still alive and that matters. Ron smiled. Not a big smile. The small, real kind. What are you going to do? Ron said. With all of it. Whatever you are now. Figure it out, Harry said. Very specific. Working on it, Harry said. I've got a list that needs dealing with. The ministry. The binding program. Making sure nothing like this gets set up again. He paused. And I've got a feeling someone's about to try to recruit me for something. Ron frowned. What do you mean? I don't know yet, Harry said. But someone's been watching. For a while. He looked at the high windows of the great hall, the grey October sky beyond them. I can feel it. A surveillance, not magical, something different. Very precise. He glanced at Ron. Have you ever heard of an organization called S.H.I.E.L.D.? Ron's frown deepened. Is that a Muggle thing? Very, Harry said. How do you know about it? One of the bindings, Harry said, was suppressing more than just magic. My awareness of the world, how wide it goes, how deep, that was being throttled too. The range of what I can perceive. He tapped his temple. The surveillance has been running for years. Now that I can feel the full scope of it, I've been tracking the signature. He finished his tea. Whoever it is, they're professional. Good equipment. Very patient. They've been watching me specifically for most of the last decade. Ron stared at him. And you're not bothered? I'm intrigued, Harry said. That's terrifying, Ron said. Probably, Harry said, standing. Come on. Let's go check on Neville. On the grounds outside, a man Harry didn't yet know by face was completing a careful circuit of the perimeter with a sensor device that had been reading, for the past 4 hours, a power signature that kept doing things it wasn't supposed to do. Coulson was used to extraordinary. He worked for a man who had assembled a team that included a god, a super soldier, and a gamma-irradiated physicist. He had once spent 45 minutes convincing a very confused alien that he was, in fact, a parking inspector. But the thing that was making him stop every 20 meters and recalibrate his readings was not the magnitude of Harry Potter's power signature, which was extraordinary. It was the deliberateness of it. The way it moved, with Harry, yes, tracking his location through the castle perfectly, but also the way it extended outward, at the edges, in these precise careful tendrils that seemed to map the environment, catalogue the people in it, note threats and persons of interest with the systematic thoroughness of a trained intelligence professional. The kid was surveilling the grounds from inside the grounds. With his mind. And he'd been doing it all day, from what Coulson's sensor baseline could reconstruct. And about 20 minutes ago, one of those precise careful tendrils had turned and found Coulson's position with an accuracy that had made Coulson genuinely freeze in place for a moment. He pulled out his phone. Sir. What? Fury said. He knows I'm here, Coulson said. A pause. How long? Unclear. Since this morning, at minimum. Possibly since the battle. Another pause. He hasn't approached you. No, Coulson said. He hasn't told anyone about you either, Fury said. We'd have picked up communications. No, Coulson said. He looked toward the castle. He knows I'm here and he's letting me stay. He paused, looking at the sensor. Sir, I think he's been feeding me information. The signature has been making itself slightly more readable in the last 4 hours. Like someone turning up the contrast on a display. He stared at the device. He's been helping me build a clearer picture of what he is. Silence on the line. Why would he do that? Fury said, and there was something in his voice, a careful something. Because, Coulson said slowly, he wants us to have complete information before we make any decisions. He looked up at the castle. He's being thorough. He's letting us see exactly what we're asking about before we ask. He shook his head. He's a 17-year-old kid who just won a war and he's already doing better counterintelligence work than half my field team. Coulson, Fury said. Sir. Make contact, Fury said. Today. Before someone else does. Coulson put the phone away. He straightened his coat. He looked up at the castle, at the windows where he could see figures moving in the afternoon light, and at one specific window where someone was standing quite still and looking directly at him across the grounds with the unconcerned patience of a person who has been waiting for you to work up the nerve to come over. Coulson, who had nerve in sufficient supply, started walking toward the gate. Harry Potter watched him come from the second-floor window and felt the shape of what was approaching, the specific quality of professional competence and genuine curiosity and a loyalty that ran deep and honest, underneath the operational cool. He felt, also, the plane that had landed in Edinburgh that morning, and the person on it, who had a different quality altogether, larger, more complex, with the specific weight of someone who had spent decades making decisions that moved the world. That one would come tomorrow. He had today to prepare. He turned from the window and went to meet the man in the dark coat. Chapter 4, Two Kinds of Dangerous. Coulson had rehearsed 3 opening lines. The first was professional, direct identification, shield credentials, clear statement of purpose. The second was more casual, designed to lower defenses, the kind of opening he used when he needed someone to feel like a conversation was happening rather than a debrief. The third was the honest one, the one he only used when he'd already decided the person across from him deserved it. Harry met him at the castle gate and Coulson forgot all 3. Not because Harry did anything threatening. He came down the path from the main doors at an unhurried pace, hands in his jacket pockets, and he looked. Coulson's first thought was that he looked young, which was obvious but still somehow striking after a day of watching him on sensors as something that registered more like a geological event than a person. He was slight and dark-haired and wearing clothes that needed replacing and glasses that were slightly crooked on his face, and he looked at Coulson with green eyes that were, up close, absolutely nothing like a 17-year-old's eyes. "Phil Coulson," Harry said. "Not a question." "Harry Potter," Coulson said. "Also not a question." Then, because the honest approach had always worked better anyway, "You've known I was here since last night." "Since the battle," Harry confirmed. "Your surveillance equipment has a distinct frequency. I've been feeling it for years actually, just never knew what it was." He looked at the sensor device visible in Coulson's breast pocket. "You can take it out. The readings will be cleaner if you're within 10 meters. Coulson took it out. The display immediately sharpened. He looked at it for a moment. "You've been adjusting your output." "I wanted you to have accurate data," Harry said. "Seemed fair. You've been patient about gathering it." Coulson thought about 15 years of SHIELD surveillance, the careful infrastructure Fury had built, the thousands of hours of analyst time. "We have been patient," he said. "I know," Harry said. "Come on. There's tea." They sat in a small room off the entrance hall that had survived the battle in better condition than most, a professor's office, cleared of its occupant, with a fire going and 2 chairs pulled up and a pot of tea on the desk that Harry had clearly organized in advance. Coulson sat down, put his sensor on the desk, and decided to dispense entirely with the staged approach. "My director is Nick Fury," he said. "He runs an organization called SHIELD. Strategic Homeland Intervention, Enforcement and Logistics Division. We operate across approximately 40 countries, we have a mandate from a Global Security Council, and our particular focus is on what you might call extraordinary threats and extraordinary assets." He paused. "You qualify as both." "I figured," Harry said, pouring tea with the domestic ease of someone who had spent years in a school where tea was the social currency. "How long has he been watching me specifically?" "Since 1991, Coulson said. You showed up on our anomaly detection in July of that year. We've been building a file ever since." "What does the file say?" Coulson considered. "That you are consistently, dramatically underestimated by every institution responsible for your welfare. That you have survived things that should have killed you through a combination of talent, luck, and a specific kind of stubborn competence that our analysts kept trying to classify as recklessness until someone pointed out it always worked." He sipped his tea. "And that someone has been suppressing your actual capability for your entire life." Harry held his mug in both hands. "What does Fury want?" "To talk," Coulson said. "He's in Edinburgh. He'll be here tomorrow. And after the talk, Coulson met his eyes. He'll make you an offer. What kind of offer depends on this conversation. He set his mug down. I'm not here to recruit you. I'm here because Fury doesn't walk into meetings blind and I'm his advance read on people. You're reading me right now, Harry said. I'm trying to, Coulson said. What are you getting? Coulson thought about the censors, the battle, the Great Hall conversation with the Ministry, Snape's hospital room, the window where Harry had stood watching him all morning. Someone who has spent 17 years being managed by other people's plans and who has spent the last 12 hours very carefully and very deliberately refusing to be managed. He paused. And someone who is, genuinely, still figuring out what he wants. Harry was quiet for a moment. That's accurate, he said. What does Fury want from me? Not the diplomatic version. The actual version. He wants to know if you're a threat, Coulson said, and watched Harry's face for the reaction. There wasn't one, particularly, just a slight shift that might have been acknowledgement. And if you're not a threat, he wants to know if you're useful. He picked up the censor, looked at the readings, set it back down. The numbers on this thing currently suggest you are the most powerful magical individual we've ever catalogued. That fact, in Fury's world, demands an answer to both questions. I'm not a threat, Harry said. Unless someone makes me one. That's what everyone says, Coulson said. I know, Harry said. The difference is I have 17 years of evidence. He looked at Coulson steadily. I had the power to end that battle last night in under a minute. I had the power to kill Voldemort 8 different ways. I had the power to walk into the Ministry and tear through every ward they have. I didn't do any of those things. He set down his mug. Not because I was afraid. Because I wasn't interested. What are you interested in? Harry thought about it. For long enough that Coulson understood the pause wasn't evasion, it was a genuine question he was genuinely answering. Making sure it doesn't happen again, he said finally. What was done to me? The bindings, the manipulation, all of it. Not just to me. To anyone. The wizarding world has a very long history of deciding that power it doesn't understand needs to be contained rather than respected. He looked at the fire. I want to change that architecture. The whole thing. That's a significant project, Coulson said. I have time, Harry said. Coulson looked at him. He thought about the 62-page file and how much of it was wrong, and he thought about what he'd write in the update tonight, and he decided on something. Can I ask you something off the record? Not for Fury's briefing. Harry looked faintly amused. Shield has off the record. I do, Coulson said. All right. Last night, Coulson said. When you walked back out of that forest. You just, whatever happened in there happened, the bindings broke, you found out what you actually are. And you walked back out and the first thing you did was call his name. He paused. Tom. You called him Tom. Why? Harry looked at him for a long moment. Because that's what he was, he said. A boy who was afraid of death and made terrible choices because of it. Calling him Lord Voldemort, using the name he invented, the persona he built, that's giving him the mythology. That's fighting the story he told about himself. He held Coulson's gaze. I wasn't interested in fighting his story. I was interested in ending it. Coulson was quiet. You were right to ask, Harry said. That's the thing Fury needs to know, isn't it? Not whether I can fight. Whether I understand why I'm fighting and when to stop. Yes, Coulson said simply. Tell him I understand both, Harry said. And tell him to bring better tea. This castle supply is starting to wear thin. Hermione found him afterward in the library. Of course she did, the library had been her crisis management location since first year, the place she went to convert overwhelming feeling into organized information, the way other people went for walks or hit things. She was at a table near the window with 4 books open simultaneously and a roll of parchment beside her that was already half covered in her small precise handwriting. Harry sat down across from her and she didn't look up. "The Magical Rights Charter of 1703, she said, without preamble. "Have you actually read it?" "Not the whole thing," Harry admitted. "You should. It's remarkable." She turned a page. It was written after the last major binding program. There was one in the 1690s, similar structure to what was done to you but broader, targeted at entire families. It was repealed in 1847 when the relevant ministry committee decided the supernatural threat environment had changed. She looked up. They effectively removed the protections it provided. The charter is still technically law, but it hasn't been enforced in 170 years. So when I cited it to Williamson, you were citing something he almost certainly didn't know existed in that form, Hermione said, with the particular satisfaction of someone who has found a very good legal weapon in the stacks. But it's valid. It's still valid. And the precedent it establishes for the illegality of non-consensual binding is, she turned the book around and pointed to a passage. "Harry. This is extraordinary. This passage alone could overturn the entire framework the ministry has been using to justify magical suppression orders for the last century." Harry read the passage. "You want to bring a case?" "I want to bring several cases," Hermione said. "I want to rebuild the entire legal framework for how the wizarding world treats extraordinary magical ability. Starting with you but not ending there." She put her hand flat on the open book. "The binding program wasn't unique to you. There are almost certainly others, people who were flagged early, who were suppressed, who went through their entire lives thinking they were less than they actually were." Her voice had the particular intensity it always had when she found the thing she was going to dedicate herself to. "And I want to find them." Harry looked at her. He thought about the file, the clinical documentation, the note about similar candidates reviewed and dismissed, 1983 to 1991. "There are others," he said. The file mentioned a review process. "There are likely 6 or 7 people who were considered for the program and rejected." "And the ones who weren't rejected, exactly," Hermione said. "This is going to take years," Harry said. "I know," she said, without any hesitation. "Good." He smiled at that. The complete absence of doubt in it, Hermione Granger had found her work, and she was going to do it with the systematic thoroughness she brought to everything, and the institutions of the wizarding world were going to have an interesting time with her. "I'll help," he said. "Whatever you need." "I know you will," she said. She closed one of the books, opened another. "How was the shield man?" Harry raised an eyebrow. "How did you know?" "You had the look you get when you've had an interesting conversation with someone competent," she said. "Also Ron mentioned you told him someone was watching and that they were Muggle." "He was good," Harry said. "Honest, which I didn't entirely expect. He told me what they want straight out." "Which is?" "To determine whether I'm a threat," Harry said. "His director is coming tomorrow." Hermione stopped writing. "Nick Fury," she said. Harry stared at her. "How do you know who Nick Fury is?" "I did research after you mentioned S.H.I.E.L.D. "To Ron," she said, pulling out a separate sheet of notes, because of course she had. "He's the director. Former CIA, decorated military record, has been running S.H.I.E.L.D. for somewhere between 15 and 20 years, exact tenure classified. He lost his eye in an incident in, actually that part's quite heavily redacted." She looked at the notes. "He has a very particular public record which suggests the actual record is considerably more extensive. He's handled metahuman assets, Asgardian contacts, super soldier management." She looked up. "He's not someone who will be easily impressed." "Good," Harry said. "You're looking forward to it," she said, with a slightly suspicious expression. "I'm looking forward to a conversation with someone who will tell me the truth about what they want," Harry said. "That's been rare in my life." Hermione's expression softened. "Harry. I'm fine, he said. I mean it. He considered. I'm more fine than I've been in as long as I can remember. Which is strange given everything. But I feel like, he gestured. Like I can see clearly. Like everything has the right weight. She looked at him for a long moment with those eyes that had always seen him accurately. You seem, she said carefully, like yourself. Like a version of yourself that never had the chance to exist before. That's exactly what it is, he said. She looked at him for another moment. Then she reached across the table and squeezed his hand once, firmly, and went back to her books. Which was Hermione's version of a declaration of profound affection, and he received it as such. Ron was with George. Harry found them in a small courtyard off the east wing, sitting on a stone bench with their backs against the wall and their faces turned up to the thin afternoon sun. George had a bandage on his left hand from a curse in the battle and the particular quality of stillness about him that Harry had never seen before. George was never still, George was motion and noise and the constant low-level energy of a person whose brain ran fast and found expression in everything. This stillness was grief wearing George's face and it was harder to look at than Harry had expected. He sat down on the bench on George's other side, and the three of them sat in the thin October sun and said nothing for a while. He was right next to me, George said eventually. He stopped. I keep going over it. We were right next to each other and then there was an explosion in the corridor and then, he stopped again. Picked up a pebble from the ground and turned it over in his fingers. You don't have to, Ron started. I know I don't have to, George said. Not unkindly, just firmly. I want to. He turned the pebble over. He was laughing. That's the last thing. He said something, he was taking the mickey out of Percy, of all people. Percy had made some joke about the Death Eaters and Fred thought it was the funniest thing Percy had ever done in his life. A pause. He was laughing and then the wall came down. Harry sat with that. The three of them held the silence together, held it the way you hold something heavy, together, which makes it not lighter but more bearable. The pebble turned in George's fingers. The sun moved a centimeter behind a cloud. What do I do with the shop? George said finally. It wasn't a question exactly, more a thought that had made it out loud by accident. Whatever you want, Harry said. Easy to say. I mean it, Harry said. Whatever you want. If you want to run it, run it. If you want to close it, close it. If you want to burn it down and do something completely different, that's a legitimate option. George looked sideways at him. Burn it down, he said flatly. Figuratively, Harry said. Probably. The corner of George's mouth moved. The smallest possible thing. He'd have wanted it open, he said. The bastard. He'd have wanted it open and full of customers and probably some new product specifically designed to irritate Percy. That sounds right, Ron said. He'd also, George said, and his voice went quieter, he'd have wanted, he had this idea. Before all of this. A scholarship program. For kids who couldn't afford Hogwarts supplies. He kept saying we should do it with the profits, set some aside every year. He turned the pebble over once more. He never wrote it down properly. We talked about it for about an hour one night and then something exploded in the testing room and we forgot. I remember it, Harry said. George looked at him. The night you're talking about, Harry said. I was there. I remember every word of it. He held George's gaze. I can write it up. Every detail. If you want. George stared at him for a long moment. There was something happening in his face that was too complicated for a name, grief and gratitude and a particular kind of surprised recognition. The new you, he said slowly. Ron said you're different. A bit, Harry said. He said more than a bit, George said. He looked at Harry with the Fred and George perceptiveness that had always been sharper than people gave them credit for. He said you walked out of the forest and Tom Riddle was suddenly the least frightening thing in the building. That's accurate, Harry said. George nodded slowly. Then he said, with a quality that was the first real echo of his usual self, just a thread of it, thin and new, but there, the scholarship. Fred would want it named after someone ridiculous. Not after him. Someone completely unlikely. Filch, Ron said immediately. George pointed at Ron. Exactly, he said. The Argus Filch Memorial Scholarship for Promising Young Wizards. He paused. He'd have lost his mind. Absolutely, Harry said. George laughed. It was short and it hurt him, Harry could feel that, but it was real. The first real laugh. All right, George said. He stood up, pocketed the pebble, straightened his jacket. All right. Write it up. Everything you remember. He looked at Harry again, one more long look, measuring something. And whatever it is that happened to you, I'm glad it happened. He clapped Harry once on the shoulder, firmly, the way a Weasley did when they meant something they didn't have words for. Fred would have been smug about it for years. He went back inside. Ron exhaled slowly. He'll be okay, he said, the way you say something you're not certain of because you need to believe it. Eventually, Harry said. Yeah. Nick Fury arrived the next morning. Not with fanfare and not with an entourage, just a car that stopped at the gate at 9:15 with a driver who stayed in the car, and one man in a long black coat who came through the gate on foot and stood in the morning light looking up at the castle with the expression of a man absorbing a significant amount of information simultaneously. Harry watched him from the steps. Fury was taller than he'd expected. He had the bearing of someone who had spent a long time in environments where bearing was a form of armor, straight, deliberate, with an economy of movement that suggested complete awareness of every option available to him at any given moment. He was looking at the castle and at the grounds and at the post-battle damage and at Harry, all at the same time, and Harry felt the quality of his attention the way you feel a high-pressure system. Fury walked up the path and stopped at the bottom of the steps. He looked at Harry. Harry looked at him. You're shorter than the file suggested, Fury said. Your file is wrong about a few things, Harry said. I know, Fury said. I read Coulson's update. He came up the steps. Nick Fury. Harry Potter. I know who you are, Fury said. I've known who you are since you were 1 year old and a building in Surrey shook itself to pieces during your first accidental magic event. Harry raised his eyebrows slightly. You have records from when I was 1. I have records, Fury said, from before you were born. There were anomaly readings around your parents during your mother's pregnancy. Whatever you are, you came in already running hot. He looked at Harry steadily. Now are we going to stand on these steps or is there somewhere to sit down? McGonagall gave them her office. She did it with the slightly compressed expression of someone who had decided, in the interests of Harry's well-being and possibly the structural integrity of Scotland, to cooperate with whatever this was. She left tea on the desk and closed the door behind her with the exact amount of firmness that conveyed both courtesy and a clear message about what would happen if the building suffered any further damage. Fury sat down and opened a folder. Harry sat across from him and looked at the folder. It was thick. On the cover, in plain block letters, Wand. Subject, HJP, 460 pages, Fury said. As of this morning, 493. He looked at Harry over the folder. I'm going to be honest with you. Not because I'm always honest, I'm not, but because I've read enough of your file to know that being dishonest with you would be both pointless and counterproductive. Appreciated, Harry said. You are the most powerful magical individual we've ever catalogued, Fury said. By a significant margin. The number 2 on that list was Albus Dumbledore. You are not close to number 2. He said this without drama, in the same tone he might use to discuss weather. That fact requires me to ask you some questions. Ask them, Harry said. Are you controllable? No, Harry said. Fury looked at him. Most people say yes to that question. Most people are lying or wrong, Harry said. I'm not controllable. I'm not going to pretend to be controllable to make this conversation more comfortable. He held Fury's gaze. What I am is reasonable. I respond to good arguments and legitimate authority. I make choices based on ethics rather than orders. Those are not the same thing as controllable, and anyone who tells you they are is selling something. Fury was quiet for a moment. Are you a threat to civilian populations? No. To legitimate governments? Depends on what they're doing, Harry said. If a government is running a program that binds children without their consent to make them more manageable, then yes, I'm a threat to that program. I think that's correct. He met Fury's eye, the real one, the assessing one. Is that the kind of threat you're worried about? No, Fury said, and something shifted fractionally in his expression. That's the kind of threat I occasionally find useful. Harry waited. Fury leaned back. Here's what I know about your world, he said. The magical community of Britain is currently sitting on a governance crisis. The ministry is in chaos, the Wisingamot is divided, and there is a population of approximately 30,000 people in Britain alone who are going to need some kind of functional leadership structure in the next 6 months before the power vacuum gets filled by something worse. He closed the folder. You have approximately the right combination of credibility, capability, and lack of institutional baggage to influence how that structure develops. You want me to go into politics, Harry said. I want you to be aware of the opportunity, Fury said. What you do with the awareness is your business. What's your business in it? Harry said. My business, Fury said, is making sure that whatever governance structure emerges from this crisis is one that plays reasonably well with the rest of the world. Magical Britain has been operating in complete isolation from every non-magical institution on the planet for centuries. Given what I now know about the capabilities of the people in it, he tapped the folder. That isolation is a risk management problem. You want integration, Harry said. I want communication, Fury said. Integration is a 20-year conversation. Communication is a phone call. He pulled a card from his breast pocket and set it on the desk. That's a direct line. Encrypted, magical frequency secure, our tech division has been working on that compatibility problem for 3 years. He looked at Harry. I'm not asking you to work for me. I'm not asking you to report to me. I'm asking you to pick up the phone if you see something that looks like a global problem. Harry looked at the card. Then at Fury. And if I see something that looks like a global problem inside S.H.I.E.L.D.? Fury held his gaze without flinching. Then I hope you'll have the conversation with me before you do anything about it. That, Harry said, is the most honest thing anyone in authority has said to me in 17 years. Low bar, Fury said. Extremely, Harry said. He picked up the card. Fury watched him. The assessment was still running, Harry could feel it, the constant professional evaluation, the weighing of data against expectation, but there was something new in it. Something that wasn't quite respect, because respect implied a prior deficit and Fury struck him as someone who didn't operate in deficits. It was more like a recognition. The acknowledgement of a peer, which was its own thing entirely. The binding program, Harry said. The documentation. I have 43 pages identifying ministry officials involved. I'm pursuing that through wizarding legal channels, but some of the decisions that enabled it, he paused. Some of those decisions were made in coordination with Muggle government contacts. Fury was very still. What kind of contacts? The kind that needed to know there was a containment program in place for the most powerful magical individual in Britain, Harry said. The kind that needed reassurance that he wouldn't be a problem. He watched Fury's face. I think you know what contacts I mean. A long pause. Yes, Fury said. I have some ideas. I'd like those ideas in writing, Harry said. At some point. When you've had time to verify. Fury looked at him steadily. You're building a case. I'm building several cases, Harry said. I'd like them to be thorough. Fury was quiet for a moment. Then something happened at the corner of his mouth, not quite a smile, the expression a smile would make in a funhouse mirror, shaped right but harder. Coulson said you were interesting. Coulson was being professional, Harry said. What he actually thought was that I was better at this than expected. Fury's not quite smile sharpened. He did say that too. He stood, picked up the folder. The line on that card is always open. Don't abuse it, I mean that, I have 30 active crises at any given moment and I can't give you unlimited access to my operational bandwidth. I'll only call when it matters, Harry said. Define matters. World-ending level events, Harry said. Or thereabouts. In my experience, Fury said, moving toward the door, thereabouts covers a lot of ground. In mine too, Harry said. Fury opened the door, then stopped. He looked back over his shoulder with the unhurried deliberation of a man who has never made an accidental pause in his life. The Dumbledore situation, he said. The bindings. The manipulation. The plan. He met Harry's eyes. For what it's worth, and I understand it may not be worth much, coming from me, what was done to you was wrong. Strategically defensible and ethically wrong, which is a combination I've encountered before and which I have occasionally been guilty of myself. He paused. I wanted to say that directly. Harry looked at him. Thank you, he said. That does mean something. Fury left. Harry sat in the office alone for a moment, the card in his hand, and felt the shape of the last 24 hours settle around him. Coulson last night. Fury this morning. The Ministry delegation. Snape in the hospital wing. Hermione and her books. George with his pebble in the courtyard. He put the card in his pocket. He looked at Dumbledore's portrait. It had been still throughout the meeting, which meant Dumbledore had been listening and had chosen not to speak. Harry looked at it directly. The painted figure met his eyes. Well? Harry said. He's a remarkable man, the portrait said. In the way that several of the people you've encountered recently are remarkable. Pragmatic beyond comfort but not beyond conscience. Like you, Harry said. The portrait was quiet for a moment. Like me, it said. With significantly less excuse for the errors. What errors are you admitting to specifically? Harry said. I want to know which ones have made the list. The portrait looked at him with those painted blue eyes that still, somehow, held the specific weight of Albus Dumbledore's intelligence. All of them, it said. Given enough time and the perspective of, this, a gesture at itself, at the painted frame. All of them. Harry nodded. He didn't feel the need to say anything more. He'd said what needed saying in the between place, and the portrait had heard it all. This was just inventory. He stood up and went to find Hermione. She was in the room of requirement, which had survived the fiend fire, damaged, but not destroyed, and which had rearranged itself, in the way it always did, into exactly what was needed. What Hermione apparently needed was a law library, because that was what had materialized, floor-to-ceiling shelves, 6 tables, good lighting, and an organizational system that Harry recognized as Hermione's own, meaning it was rigorously logical and would be baffling to anyone else. Ron was there too, sitting at the end of one table with a copy of something that looked like the Magical Rights Charter and the expression of a person who was reading it dutifully and understanding about 40% of it. How was the second conversation? Hermione asked without looking up. Better than expected, Harry said, sitting down. He's honest. Within operational constraints, she said. Within operational constraints, Harry agreed. Which is more than I can say for most people. What does he want? Communication channel. He's worried about wizarding Britain's governance vacuum. Harry pulled the nearest file toward him. He also has leads on the Muggle government contacts who enabled the binding program. Hermione's quill stopped. She looked up. He confirmed there were Muggle contacts. Confirmed he has ideas, Harry said. He'll verify. She looked at him for a long moment. Harry, she said. If there were Muggle government officials involved in authorizing the suppression of a child's magical ability, that's not just a wizarding law case. That's international, Harry said. I know. The legal framework gets very complicated very fast at that level, she said. Do you want help or not? Harry said. She blinked. Then the corner of her mouth lifted. I want help, she said. Then let's figure out the framework, he said, pulling his chair in. Between the three of us we've probably got enough. I'm mostly decorative, Ron said, from the end of the table. You're reading the charter, Harry said. That's essential. Ron looked at the document. This is really dry, he said. Law often is, Hermione said. How do people do this for a job, he said. Dedication, Hermione said. And an awareness that the dry bits are what make the interesting bits possible. Ron turned a page with the air of a man who was not yet convinced. Harry watched him for a moment, the familiar profile, the Weasley red of his hair, the way he held a document like it might do something unexpected, and felt something settle in his chest that was simple and certain. He was alive. They were alive. Fred was gone and Remus was gone and Tonks was gone, and that grief was real and permanent and would not be resolved by any amount of good forward motion, it would just be carried. But they were alive, and they were here, and whatever happened next was going to be chosen by Harry Potter rather than designed for him. That was new. That was everything. Ron, he said. What? Ron said, still reading. What do you want? Harry said. Not what your mum wants, not what the ministry is going to offer you when they start handing out Order of Merlin medals to everyone involved. What do you actually want to do? Ron looked up from the charter. He looked at Harry for a moment, then at Hermione, then back at Harry, with the expression of someone who had not been asked this particular question, in this particular way, before. He stopped. Started again. I've been thinking about becoming an Auror because that's what everyone assumed I would do, and I never actually sat down and decided. He put the document down. But I actually think what I want is, he looked at the charter. What Hermione's doing. This. The legal rebuilding bit. Not from the law side, he glanced at Hermione. No offense. None taken, she said, watching him carefully. From the people side, he said. There are going to be, if what you said is right, Harry, there are people out there who were bound like you were or similar. Who went through their whole lives not knowing what they could have been. He said it quietly. Someone needs to find them. Talk to them. Not in a ministry way. He gestured. Human way, Harry said. Yeah, Ron said. In a human way. He looked slightly embarrassed by the clarity of it, the way Ron always looked when he was being more perceptive than he wanted credit for. Is that stupid? Ron, Hermione said, with a firmness that settled the question. Absolutely, that is exactly what's needed, and you are exactly the right person for it. Ron looked at her. Then he nodded once, quickly, and picked up the charter again. Right, he said. Good. He turned a page. This is still very dry though. Harry started laughing. Hermione joined him. Ron looked up with a martyred expression that was covering a real smile and said, I'm glad my pain is entertaining, which made it worse. The room held them, laughing in the ruins of what had been, in the careful architecture of what was going to be built, and outside the windows of Hogwarts the autumn light was doing what it always did at this time of year, going gold and specific, the particular October gold that meant the year was turning. Somewhere in Edinburgh, Nick Fury was on a plane reading Coulson's updated report. Somewhere in the hospital wing, Severus Snape was arguing with Madame Pomfrey about his discharge timeline, and losing, which he found personally insulting. Somewhere in the castle, Tom Riddle, elderly, wandless, confused, and very much alive, was under guard and beginning to understand, for the first time in 60 years, what it felt like to be afraid of the future rather than of death. And in the room of requirement, Harry Potter sat with his two best friends and worked on something that mattered, and did not suppress anything, and was not afraid of anything, and was, for the first time in a life that had been designed around his usefulness to others, simply, entirely, himself. Chapter 5, The Last Horcrux. Standing 3 days after the battle, Tom Riddle asked to speak to Harry. The request came through McGonagall, delivered with the compressed expression she'd been wearing consistently since the battle, the look of a woman managing an unprecedented situation through the application of sheer professional competence and increasingly strong tea. The guard rotation on Riddle's room had been set up by Harry himself, with 2 order members on 4-hour shifts and a ward configuration that he'd personally laid into the walls, something so layered and specific that the ministry's security team had come in, looked at it, and quietly decided to leave it alone. He used the word please, McGonagall told Harry. Twice. Harry set down his quill. Did he? Apparently. She paused. For what it's worth, he's been quieter than expected. One of the guards described him as bewildered. He is bewildered, Harry said. He's never been mortal before. Not really. He considered. When did he ask? This morning. He's been asking since yesterday, but the guards weren't sure whether to pass it on. Harry stood. I'll go now. McGonagall looked at him with the particular expression she used when she was deciding not to advise him against something. It was a relatively new addition to her repertoire and he suspected he was the primary cause of it. Should I? I'll be fine, Harry said. He doesn't have any magic. I checked. She nodded. Then, because she was Minerva McGonagall, don't let him manipulate you. He'll try, Harry said. I'll be fine. The room they were keeping Riddle in was on the 4th floor, a comfortable room, not a cell, because Harry had insisted on that. He was an old man without magic in a building full of people who hated him. A cell was theater. The room had a window, a bed, a desk, and a stack of Muggle books that someone, he suspected Hermione, had left without comment, ranging from philosophy to history to a very battered paperback thriller that seemed incongruous next to Locke and Hegel but was, Harry thought, probably the more useful of the options right now. The guard, a young order member named Savage who had survived the battle with a broken wrist and considerable composure, nodded at Harry and stepped aside. Harry went in. Riddle was sitting by the window. The transformation was still striking every time Harry saw it. The man in the chair looked nothing like Lord Voldemort. He was old, genuinely, physically old in the way he'd never been during the Horcrux years, because the Horcruxes had preserved a kind of terrible vitality in him. Without them he'd arrived at his actual age all at once, somewhere in his early 70s, with white hair and a face that had settled into lines that were sharp and intelligent but unmistakably human. His eyes were dark, brown, actually, the red entirely gone, just ordinary dark brown eyes and a face that was, Harry could see now, its own answer to the question of where Tom Riddle had come from. He looked like a clever, damaged, elderly man. He looked like what he was. He turned from the window when Harry came in. Looked at him with those ordinary dark eyes with an expression that was doing several things at once, the habit of calculation, still there, still running, but with a new undertone that Harry identified after a moment as something he'd never expected to see in this face. Uncertainty. Tom Riddle was uncertain. Sit down, Riddle said, and even his voice was different, lower, less resonant, without the particular carrying quality that had been partly magical projection. I'll stand, Harry said, not combatively, just honestly. He wanted the full range of the room. You asked to see me. Riddle looked at him for a moment. I wanted to ask you something, he said. Ask. Why am I alive? Harry had expected several possible openings. Not that one. Because I chose not to kill you, he said. I understand that part, Riddle said, with a precise impatience that was recognizably, completely him. I am asking why. What purpose is served by my continued existence? You had every, he stopped. The impatience flickered. Something underneath it showed briefly. You had every justification. Justification isn't the same as reason, Harry said. I didn't have a reason. That's not an answer. It's the only one I've got, Harry said. He came further into the room, leaned against the wall opposite the window. You spent 60 years running from death. Killing you would have been giving you what you spent your whole life trying to avoid, a quick end, a defined moment, a line you could see coming from 50 years away and build your whole philosophy around. He looked at Riddle steadily. This, waking up mortal, unknown, without power, having to exist in the ordinary world with all the ordinary fears, this is the thing you were actually afraid of. Not death. This. Riddle was quiet for a long moment. That's punitive, he said. Maybe, Harry said. Or maybe it's the only circumstance in which you might actually have to think about the choices you made without the armor of power around you. He paused. I'm not interested in your suffering. I'm interested in whether, when everything else is stripped away, there's something left in there capable of reckoning with itself. Riddle looked at him. And if there isn't? Then there isn't, Harry said. That's an answer too. Another silence. Outside the window the grounds were gray and still, the lake flat as metal in the morning light. Riddle turned back to it, not away from Harry, just toward the window, the way people look at an exterior when the interior is too crowded. I have been reading, Riddle said, nodding at the books on the desk. Muggle philosophy. History. He paused. It's not entirely without value. Hermione will be pleased, Harry said. Your friend, Riddle said. The one who is building the legal case. He glanced sideways at Harry. She came to see me yesterday. Harry stared at him. What? She had questions about the binding program, Riddle said. Specifically about 2 of the names I would have been aware of, given my position. She asked them with considerable directness and a recorder on the desk. He looked faintly, not amused, exactly, but something adjacent. She's formidable. She is, Harry said, filing away the conversation with Hermione he was going to need to have. Did you answer her? I answered some of them, Riddle said. The ones whose answers don't endanger anyone currently living. He turned fully from the window. I want you to understand that I am aware of exactly what I am in this situation. An old man without power whose testimony is largely self-incriminating and whose cooperation value decreases daily as your friend finds more documentation. He met Harry's eyes. I am not negotiating from a position of strength. No, Harry agreed. And yet I'm cooperating. Yes. Why do you think that is? Riddle said. Harry thought about it. He thought about the between place and the flayed thing in the corner and the moment in the clearing when the mask had slipped and Tom Riddle had appeared for 3 seconds in his own face. He thought about the pensive memories he'd seen years ago, the boy in the orphanage, the boy asking Dumbledore if he was special, the boy who had wanted so badly to be extraordinary that he'd made himself into something that couldn't die and had ended up unable to live. Because you're tired, Harry said. You've been running for 60 years and you're tired and the architecture you built your whole existence around is gone and what you're left with is, you're left with yourself, and you don't know who that is, and that's the most frightening thing you've faced. Riddle looked at him. And somewhere in there, Harry said, there's still enough of a person left to want someone to see that. Even if the someone is me. He paused. Especially if the someone is me. The silence held. You're very irritating, Riddle said, and the tone of it was so stripped of pretension, so flatly honest, that it was almost funny. I've been told, Harry said. He found Hermione in the room of requirement. You interviewed him, he said. She looked up. I did. Without telling me. I told you I was going to talk to everyone with relevant knowledge of the binding program, she said, with the serene precision of someone who has pre-thought every possible version of this conversation. He had relevant knowledge. He's Tom Riddle, Hermione. He's an elderly man without magic in a guarded room, she said. And he was cooperative. He gave me 2 names I didn't have and confirmed the Muggle government contacts Fury mentioned. She turned a page in her notes. He also told me something else. Something I think you need to hear. Harry sat down. What? She hesitated, just briefly, the one-beat pause that meant she was choosing how to frame something carefully. The binding program wasn't just Dumbledore's idea, she said. It was Dumbledore's implementation of an older idea. There's a precedent, from 1823, a committee formed specifically to identify and suppress extraordinary magical ability in children before it could threaten the established order. She met his eyes. It's called the Prometheus Protocol. It was supposed to have been disbanded in 1891 when the relevant ministry department was reorganized. But it wasn't disbanded, Harry said. It went underground, Hermione said. Moved from official ministry records to private governance. Funded by old families. The Malfoys were contributors. The Knots. 3 others. She set her quill down. Riddle told me because he was once offered membership. He turned them down. He said they weren't offering enough control, Hermione said. He didn't trust their methodology. She paused. Which in a horrible, convoluted way means the binding program that was done to you was actually less extreme than what the Prometheus Protocol was originally designed to do. Harry sat with that. What was the original design? Permanent magical castration, Hermione said, and her voice was very flat and very careful. Not suppression. Removal. The way it was done to you was, Dumbledore modified the approach. Made it reversible in principle, even if the reversal mechanism was supposed to be death. She looked at Harry. He considered his version an ethical improvement. The room was very quiet. Harry breathed. Let it sit. Let the full weight of it arrive without flinching from it. The Prometheus Protocol, he said. Is it still active? I don't know yet, Hermione said. But I'm going to find out. The families involved, Harry said. The Malfoys. Lucius Malfoy is in Azkaban, Hermione said. But the family assets are, Narcissa saved my life, Harry said. In the forest. Hermione looked at him. I know. That matters, he said. I know that too, she said. I'm not going after Narcissa. But the financial structures that funded the protocol, she tapped her notes. Those are a separate question. Harry nodded. He looked at the ceiling of the room of requirement, high, vaulted, the room having arranged itself in its library configuration. If the protocol is still active, he said, there are children right now being bound. Yes, Hermione said. Then we need to move faster, he said. Yes, she said again. He looked at her. She looked at him. The understanding between them was quick and complete, it always was, had been since their first year, would be for the rest of their lives, and what passed in that look was not a plan but a commitment. The plan would come. The commitment was that it would. I'll talk to Fury, Harry said. He has the institutional reach to find the Muggle end of the funding, Hermione said. If the protocol has international components, it does, Harry said, standing. I can feel the architecture of it. Now that I know what to look for, he paused. It's like being able to see a pattern in wallpaper once someone points it out. It's everywhere. Hermione stared at him. You can feel it. Right now. I can feel binding signatures, he said. I've been feeling them since the forest. The ones on me broke, but the frequency, I know what they feel like now. And there are others. He crossed to the window. In Britain alone, right now, I can feel, he stopped. Counted. 11. 11 people currently carrying active binding signatures consistent with what I had. The silence from behind him was Hermione's version of being profoundly shocked. 11, she said. At least, he said. My range isn't unlimited. Globally, he shook his head. I don't want to think about globally yet. She was already writing. He called Fury from the grounds. The phone Fury had given him was small and entirely ordinary looking, which Harry suspected was not at all what it was. He stood by the lake in the cold morning air and dialed the number on the card, and Fury picked up on the second ring. Potter, Fury said, as if he'd been expecting the call. The Prometheus Protocol, Harry said. A pause. Where did you hear that name? Tom Riddle, Harry said. Who got it from 60 years of being inside the darkest parts of wizarding governance? I need to know if you have anything on it. Another pause, longer. We have a file, Fury said. It's thin. Cross-referenced with 3 other files we've never fully connected. His voice had the particular quality it got when he was processing something quickly. How bad is it? Ongoing, Harry said. Active binding program for extraordinary magical children. International funding. Possible Muggle government component. He paused. I can currently detect 11 active victims in Britain. I need the international picture. Give me 4 hours, Fury said. I need it in 2. 3, Fury said. And don't do anything until you hear from me. Fury, Harry said. 3 hours, Potter. Some of us have to use phones and databases instead of, a gesture at whatever he imagined Harry was doing. 3 hours. Fine, Harry said. He hung up and stood by the lake and felt the 11 binding signatures and felt, also, the larger pattern of it, the way it was organized, the nodes of it, the institutional weight that had kept it running for 200 years. He could feel the architecture the way you feel a building's frame even through the walls. He felt something else too. Something he hadn't felt before. Not a binding signature, something older and stranger, something that had been sitting in the margins of his awareness since the forest and that he'd kept setting aside because there was always something more immediate. It was coming from below the castle. Deep below, deeper than the dungeons, deeper than anything in the standard Hogwarts configuration he knew. A chamber or a space of some kind, sealed with magic so old it predated the binding signatures by centuries. Something dormant, but not inert. Something waiting. Harry stood by the lake for a long moment. Then he went to find the entrance. It took him 40 minutes. The castle helped, the same way it had been helping since the night of the battle, adjusting itself around him with that ancient intelligent accommodation. A staircase that hadn't been in the right place was in the right place. A section of corridor that had always seemed to dead-end revealed a door at the baseboards, old iron handle worn smooth. Below that, stone steps that got colder and older with every descent. He had a lumos on his wand, his own wand, holly and phoenix feather, the wand that had been his since he was 11 and that fit his hand now differently than it had a week ago, responding to the full depth of what he was with a kind of vibrating eagerness. The chamber was large. He stepped into it and held his wand up and the light spread, across stone walls that were older than anything in the castle above, carved with symbols he recognized from some of his reading and from some deeper place that the bindings had been suppressing. A founder's chamber. Not any of the 4 chambers he'd read about or been told about. Something prior to the 4. Something from before Hogwarts was Hogwarts, from when this hill had a different purpose. In the center of the chamber was a stone table. On the table, bound in what looked like chains but was clearly something far more complex, magical bindings of extraordinary density, layer after layer, centuries of accumulated constraint, was a book. Not a Horcrux. He'd have felt that. Something else. He walked to the table and looked at the book without touching it. It was large, folio size, bound in something that wasn't quite leather, with a cover that had been plain once and was now completely obscured by the binding enchantments layered over it. He reached out and put his hand flat on the cover. The bindings screamed. Not audibly, it was a sensation, a pressure, a resistance that would have stopped anyone in the wizarding world who'd ever tried this before. He felt them push back against him with the combined force of centuries of intent. He felt every caster who'd ever contributed a layer, some afraid, some careful, some simply following an institutional protocol they'd inherited without questioning. He pushed back. Not with force, with presence. The full, unbound weight of what he was, set against the accumulated weight of everything that had been trying to contain things like him for centuries. The bindings didn't dissolve all at once, they came apart in sequence, the newer ones first, then progressively older layers, each one releasing with a frequency that Harry was now tuned to recognize. The book opened. The script inside was unlike anything he'd seen, not any language he could identify, but he found, with no surprise whatsoever, that he could read it. That was apparently part of what the bindings had been suppressing. The ability to read things that predated the conventional magical record. He stood in the old chamber and read for a long time. Ron found Hermione in the room of requirement 3 hours later with an expression on his face that meant something had happened. "What?" Hermione said. "Harry's been in the dungeons for 2 hours and no one knew where he was and McGonagall is doing the face," Ron said. "The face that means she's professionally calm and personally furious." Hermione stood up. "He went looking for something," she said, more to herself than to Ron. "He mentioned he could feel something below the castle." "Below the," Ron started. "Let's go find him," Hermione said, already moving. They found the door at the baseboards 20 minutes later. Ron spotted it because he knew this castle better than almost anyone from a pure navigation standpoint. 7 years of finding shortcuts and avoiding Filch had given him a spatial memory for Hogwarts that was close to architectural. He crouched down, looked at the iron handle. "This is old," he said. "This is really old." "Brilliantly observed," Hermione said, and pushed it open. The stone steps. The cold. The lumos Hermione cast automatically. They went down and found the chamber and found Harry sitting on the stone floor with the open book in his lap, reading, with the focused absorption of someone who has found the exact thing they needed. He looked up when they came in. His expression was, not shocked, not distressed. Clear. The particular quality of clarity that had been there since the forest but sharper now, sharpened by whatever was in the book. "What is that?" Hermione said, looking at the book with the expression of someone encountering a primary source they didn't know existed. "A record," Harry said. "Of the first time someone tried to build a binding program." He closed the book carefully. It didn't resist him. "It predates the Prometheus Protocol by about 600 years. He stood. "The founders knew about extraordinary magical ability. They disagreed about what to do with it." He held up the book. "Slytherin wanted to control it. Gryffindor wanted to train it. Ravenclaw wanted to study it." He paused. "Hufflepuff wanted to ask the person what they actually wanted." Ron stared at him. "Hufflepuff. Sprout's going to love that," Hermione murmured, still looking at the book. "It's a history of the debate," Harry said. "Every iteration of it, from the founders through to the last entry, which is dated 1887. Whoever kept this record was documenting the same institutional argument repeating itself across 800 years. He looked at the book. The answer was always the same. Every time someone tried to bind, suppress, or control extraordinary magical ability, in children especially, the long-term results were the same. Damage. Loss. And eventually, when the binding broke or wore out, an individual who had every reason to be angry at the institution that had constrained them. "Which is exactly what happened with Voldemort," Hermione said quietly. "Dumbledore knew Tom Riddle was extraordinary. He chose containment through fear rather than support through engagement, and created exactly the outcome he spent the rest of his life fighting," Harry said. "Yes." The three of them stood in the old chamber with that sitting between them. "I want to bring this upstairs," Harry said. "This is evidence. Historical evidence that the Ministry and the Wisengamot have never had access to because it's been buried under a building that forgot it was here." "The Founders' debate on record," Hermione breathed. "Harry, this could restructure the entire theoretical basis for how we approach magical governance. I know, he said. Carefully, though. In context. As part of the case, not as a weapon. She looked at him. You're thinking about how it plays. I'm thinking about what actually changes things long-term versus what makes a good argument in the short term, he said. They're not always the same. No, she said, and there was something in her voice that was, proud wasn't the right word. Something warmer than proud and more specific. They're really not. His phone vibrated in his pocket. He took it out. Fury. I need to take this, he said, and stepped toward the stairs while Ron and Hermione began examining the chamber walls and the table and the stone carvings with the focused attention of people who had each found exactly the thing they were meant to be doing. What do you have? Harry said. More than I wanted, Fury said, and his voice had the particular quality it got when the intelligence picture was larger than expected. The Prometheus Protocol has active components in 11 countries. Muggle governmental involvement in 4 of them, and one of those 4 is the United States, which is going to create significant institutional discomfort when it becomes public. When, Harry said. Not if. When, Fury said. I'm not in the business of sitting on information that affects children's welfare. A pause, as if he was slightly surprised to hear himself say it that way. There's more. The funding structure, the old wizarding families, the ones your friend identified, it runs through 3 Muggle shell corporations that connect to a broader network I've been watching for reasons that have nothing to do with magical Britain. His voice went careful. Harry. Some of the people in that network are not people I want you walking into without backup. Tell me about them, Harry said. Not on this line, Fury said. I need you in London. In person. I have people I want you to meet. Harry thought about that. London. Shield assets. The people Fury worked with. He'd read enough, in the last 3 days, to have a general picture of the extraordinary world that operated parallel to the one he'd grown up in, the super soldiers and the gods and the men in the iron suits. When, he said. 2 days, Fury said. Can you be ready? Yes, Harry said. I'm bringing Hermione. A pause. The legal one. She's already building the case, Harry said. She'll need the SHIE. LD documentation. Fine, Fury said. One more thing. A deliberate pause, the kind Fury used when what came next mattered. The 11 people in Britain you mentioned. I want to start there before we expand to the international picture. I want to break those bindings before we go public, because when this gets out the protocol will try to disappear its active cases. His voice was hard and flat. I've seen that move before. So have I, Harry said. Where are they? Sending coordinates now, Fury said. Coulson will meet you tomorrow morning. He has the field kit. Fury, Harry said. What? Thank you, Harry said. For moving fast on this. A brief silence. Children, Fury said, simply, and hung up. The first one was a girl named Clara Webb, 9 years old, living in Manchester. Harry and Coulson arrived at 7 in the morning, Coulson with his field kit and his professional comm, Harry with nothing except his wand and the ability to find the binding signature from 3 streets away. They knocked on the door of a perfectly ordinary terraced house on a perfectly ordinary street, and a perfectly ordinary woman in her 30s answered, looking confused and slightly alarmed. Clara's parents were Muggle. They knew their daughter was different. They'd been visited 2 years ago by official-seeming people in robes who had told them, kindly, reassuringly, that Clara's particular gifts were being managed by a specialist program that would ensure she developed safely and appropriately. They'd signed something. They hadn't understood what they were signing. They'd trusted the officials because the officials were polite and authoritative, and because the alternative, that their daughter might be beyond what they could handle, was frightening. Coulson talked to the parents. Harry found Clara. She was in her bedroom, 9 years old, with a stack of library books and a look on her face when Harry walked in, that look he recognized, the one that had been on his own face for so long he'd thought it was just his face. The slightly inward quality. The sense of being behind glass. "Hello," he said, and sat down on the floor of her bedroom because 9-year-olds are easier to talk to at floor level. She looked at him suspiciously. "Mom said there were people from the magic school." "That's right," he said. "My name's Harry." He paused. "I know you can feel it," he said. "Like there's something that wants to happen and it keeps almost happening and then stopping." Her eyes went wide. "That's not natural," he said gently. "That's something someone put on you. And I'm here to take it off, if you want me to." "If I want you to," she repeated. "It's your choice," he said. "Always. No one should have made the first choice without your knowledge, and I'm not going to make this one without your permission." She stared at him for a long moment with 9-year-old seriousness, which is its own kind of profound, the unfiltered direct assessment of a child who hasn't yet learned to pretend they can't see clearly. "Will it hurt?" she said. "No," he said. "It'll feel like a door opening." She thought about it. Then she nodded. He reached out, found the binding, a single one, newer than his had been, more clinical, the signature of modern methodology, and he unraveled it. Carefully. Completely. The way you unstitch something that shouldn't have been sewn. Clara Webb went very still for 3 seconds. Then she looked at her hand. A small bright light materialized above her palm, not fire, not a lumos, something personal, something entirely hers. She stared at it. Her face did the thing. The glass went away. Harry sat on her bedroom floor and felt the warmth of it, not his power, just the uncomplicated human warmth of a thing made right, and let her have the moment, the whole of it, without interrupting. "It's like breathing," she said, in a wondering voice. "Yes," he said. "That's exactly what it's like." They found 4 more that day. Manchester, Leeds, a village in Somerset, a flat in South London. Coulson drove and asked precise questions and documented everything, the field kit running constant readings, and Harry went into each home and each bedroom and each school office and each anxious conversation and did the same thing, asked, waited, unraveled. The 4th one was a 17-year-old boy in South London named Marcus, who'd been told his whole life he was a squib, who'd grown up on the edges of the wizarding world feeling the absence of something he couldn't name, who opened the door when Harry knocked and looked at him with a suspicion so deep it had become default mode. "Whatever you're selling," Marcus said. "I'm not selling anything," Harry said. "I'm here because someone lied to you and I want to fix it if you'll let me." Marcus looked at him for a long moment. "Who lied to me?" "A lot of people," Harry said honestly. "Systematically. Over a long time. I know how that feels." Something in Marcus's face shifted, a tiny movement, the crack in a wall that's been up so long it's forgotten it's not structural. "Come in," he said. An hour later, Marcus Okafor stood in his living room with magic crackling between his fingers for the first time in his life and made a sound that Harry thought he would probably carry around for a long time, a specific sound, not quite a word, the sound of a person discovering that what they'd been told about themselves was wrong and that the wrong was correctable. "I could have been doing this," he said, staring at his hands. "This whole time." "Yes," Harry said. The anger arrived then, quick and clean and entirely justified. "Who?" He looked at Harry. "Who did this?" "Who decided? That's what we're working on," Harry said. "We're building the case. It's going to take time but it's going to happen." He met Marcus's eyes. "I'd like you to be part of it, if you want. As a witness. As someone who can help find others." Marcus looked at his hands. At the light between his fingers. Back at Harry. "You're serious." "Completely," Harry said. "You're Harry Potter," Marcus said. "Yes. The Harry Potter." "There's only one," Harry said. Marcus shook his head slowly. "My gran is going to lose her mind," he said. "Is that good or bad?" Harry said. Good, Marcus said, and a slow, incredulous smile broke across his face. That's very, very good. That night, in the car back toward Edinburgh, Coulson was quiet for a long time before he said, 5 today. 6 more to go in Britain. Then the international picture. Then the legal case, Harry said. Then the institutional reform. That's a long road, Coulson said. Yes, Harry said, and looked out the window at the dark countryside moving past, the motorway lights blurring in the rain on the glass. When Fury said he wanted to know if I was useful, this is what I want to be useful for. Not fighting. Not being a weapon someone points at a problem. He paused. This. Coulson was quiet. I'll put that in my report. Do, Harry said. And tell him the report is going to need a bigger category. Already started one, Coulson said. Harry leaned back in the seat and closed his eyes and felt, across the distance, the 6 remaining binding signatures in Britain and the 11 faint ones from further away, and he felt Marcus Okafor's kitchen in South London where light was probably still crackling between someone's fingers at 1 in the morning, and he felt the old chamber below Hogwarts where a book was sitting on a stone table with 800 years of the same argument written inside it. He felt all of it. He kept it all. He didn't find it heavy. Chapter 6, Unbound. London was grey and specific in the way only London managed, not bleak, just honest, the kind of city that had been too many things for too long to bother pretending it weather it wasn't having. Harry watched it from the window of the car Fury had sent, the streets thickening as they moved south from the airport, the ordinary morning traffic of a world that had no idea what had happened in Scotland 4 days ago. That was going to change. Not today, probably not this week, but Hermione had spent the entire flight from Edinburgh drafting the first public statement, the one that would go to the Wisengamot, the ministry, and, in a carefully managed parallel process she'd been designing since the Room of Requirement, to a set of Muggle legal contacts whose existence she'd cultivated quietly since her 4th year and whose potential usefulness she'd been filing away in that organized mind of hers with the patience of someone who always played the long game. She was reading it back to herself now in the seat beside him, lips moving slightly, which meant she was checking rhythm as well as content. Ron was in the front seat asking the driver careful questions about London traffic with the genuine curiosity of a man who had lived his entire life either at the Borough or at Hogwarts and found the Muggle world interesting in the way only people who didn't grow up in it could. The driver, to his credit, was answering. Harry had the Founder's book in his bag. He'd spent 2 days reading it completely, not just the parts that related to the Prometheus Protocol, all of it, the full 800 years of argument and documentation. It had been, in the plainest terms, the most significant thing he'd ever read. Not because of its revelations about binding programs, though those were significant. Because of what it said about the fundamental question, what do you do with extraordinary capacity in a person who hasn't chosen to have it? Every generation had answered the same way. Control it. Contain it. Make it useful. Fear it. The debate was always framed as a security question, a governance question, an institutional question. Nobody had ever just asked the person. Until Helga Hufflepuff, whose entry in the record was the shortest and the one Harry had read 3 times, I asked Aldrich what he wanted and he wept and said he had never been asked. We spent the afternoon in the garden. He showed me things I have no words for. I believe we have been thinking about this incorrectly for a very long time. He'd thought about that entry all the way from Edinburgh. The shield facility was not what Harry had expected. He'd been thinking something operational, grey corridors, security checkpoints, the institutional severity of a place designed to make visitors feel slightly inadequate. What Fury had actually arranged was a conference room in a building in Southwark that looked, from the outside, like an unremarkable commercial office block and was, on the inside, equipped with the kind of technology that suggested the commercial office block framing was doing a lot of heavy lifting. Fury was already there when they arrived. Coulson beside him, and 2 others that Harry assessed in the first 3 seconds, a woman with the specific bearing of someone who had been in the field longer than most and had decided, somewhere along the way, that warmth and competence were not mutually exclusive, and a man in a suit that was doing its professional best to contain a quality of stillness so complete it had its own weather. "Maria Hill," Fury said, nodding toward the woman. "My deputy director." "Steve Rogers, the man in the suit." "Captain." Rogers looked at Harry with an expression that was completely straightforward, no calculation, no assessment theater, just direct attention. He extended his hand. "Heard a lot about you," he said, which coming from him meant Coulson's report. "Likewise," Harry said, which coming from him meant the last 4 days of contextual reading. Rogers's handshake was, not what Harry's body had expected from a handshake, which was probably informative to both of them. Hermione shook hands with Hill and immediately said, "I read your paper on enhanced individual legal frameworks from the 2012 symposium, the one that was circulated internally. I found a copy through a contact at the Home Office, and I think the jurisdictional analysis is fundamentally correct but needs updating for the non-state actor problem." Hill stared at her for a second. Then, "I've been saying that for 3 years." "I know," Hermione said. "Let me show you what I've built." They moved to one end of the table and were, from that point forward, functionally in their own meeting. Ron sat down, looked at the spread of food on the conference table. Someone had organized it thoughtfully, sandwiches and coffee and the specific kind of institutional catering that tried harder than it needed to, and said to Fury, with complete sincerity, "This is brilliant. Do you do this for every meeting?" Fury looked at him. "No." "You should," Ron said, and took a sandwich. Fury looked at Harry with an expression that said, "Clearly, your people are something else." Harry shrugged fractionally. Fury sat down. "Let me show you the full picture," Fury said, and pulled up the display. The Prometheus Protocol's international structure was, in Fury's precise presentation, both more extensive and more comprehensible than Harry had been expecting. 11 countries. 4 with confirmed Muggle governmental involvement, the US, Britain, France, and Australia. A funding network that had been running, in its modern form, since 1943, when someone had looked at the Second World War and decided that the magical community's extraordinary individuals needed to be managed before the Muggle world finished its own war and started asking questions about what else might be out there. The wartime logic had calcified into institutional habit. The habit had outlasted its context by 80 years. "How many active cases internationally?" Harry said. Fury pulled up a map. "Our best estimate is 63, he said. "That estimate is 3 years old and may be conservative." Harry sat with that number. 63 children, somewhere in the world, currently carrying bindings placed on them without consent. 63 people living at a fraction of what they actually were. "The challenge," Fury said, "is the removal process. What you did in Manchester and Leeds and Somerset, that requires you to be physically present. And you're one person. There are others who can do it," Harry said. "Not the same way I do it, but the principle is learnable. If we can document the methodology, your friend is already working on that," Coulson said, glancing toward the end of the table where Hermione had produced a stack of parchment and was talking Hill through something that was making Hill reach for a pen. "The deeper challenge," Fury said, "is the political one. The 4 governments involved are not going to cooperate voluntarily with an exposure of their involvement. The magical communities in those countries have institutional relationships with those governments that they'll want to protect." He met Harry's eyes. "This is where it gets difficult." "What's your play?" Harry said. "I don't have a play," Fury said. "I have a problem and a person who might be able to solve it. That's why you're in this room." Harry looked at the map. 63 points, scattered across the world. And behind them, the institutional network that had put them there, old families, old money, old fear dressed up as governance. "The Founder's Book," Harry said. He opened his bag and set it on the table. Fury looked at it. "What is that?" 800 years of the same argument," Harry said. "Documented by people inside the magical world from the very beginning of its institutional structure. Every time someone tried to suppress extraordinary magical ability and every time it went wrong. He looked at Fury. This is the historical precedent. Not just for the legal case but for the political one. He pushed it across the table. The magical world has been having this debate since before your country existed. The answer has always been the same. The problem is that the people with the answer were never the ones making the decisions. Fury looked at the book without touching it. You're talking about a public campaign. I'm talking about making the argument so complete and so documented that the institutions involved can't absorb it quietly, Harry said. The legal case Hermione is building, the historical record in that book, the testimony from the people who've been bound, the Muggle government documentation you have, he paused. Individually, any of those can be managed. Together they're overwhelming, Roger said, from the other end of the table. He'd been quiet until now, listening with that complete attentiveness of his. He looked at Harry. You're not thinking about winning the argument. You're thinking about making it impossible to have any other argument. Yes, Harry said. Rogers nodded slowly. That's how you change things that have been in place a long time, he said, and there was something in his voice that was 70 years of knowing exactly what institutional resistance looked like. You don't fight the structure. You make the structure's position indefensible. I'm familiar with the playbook, Fury said dryly. You're occasionally on the wrong side of it, Rogers said, with a mildness that suggested this was an ongoing conversation. Point, Fury said. He looked at Harry. What do you need from me? The documentation on the 4 governments, Harry said. Clean copies, verified chain of custody. Coulson knows how to structure it for dual-system admissibility, magical and Muggle legal frameworks. He glanced at Coulson. You've been thinking about this already. Since the car from Edinburgh, Coulson said. And I need a week, Harry said. The remaining cases, Britain first, then the international ones. I'll work with whoever you can put in each location to do the removal. But I need to be there for the ones who need, he paused. For the ones who need more than just the technical procedure. The ones who've been carrying it longest. Fury looked at him for a long moment. You know that you personally can't do all of this, he said. Not indefinitely. You can't be the one person on the planet who fixes this. I know, Harry said. I'm not trying to be. I'm trying to build the framework that means it doesn't need to be one person. He met Fury's eye. That's the whole point. The binding program worked because it concentrated power in a few hands and kept it out of everyone else's. The answer to that isn't me concentrating power. It's distributing it. Fury studied him. You've thought about this more than most people think about anything, he said. I had a lot of bindings to unpack, Harry said. The meeting ran 4 hours. By the end of it Hermione and Maria Hill had produced, between them, a legal strategy document that covered both wizarding and Muggle jurisdictional frameworks and that Hermione described as preliminary, which in Hermione's taxonomy meant approximately 80% complete. Hill described it as the most comprehensive thing she'd read in 3 years and asked if Hermione had considered consulting work, which Hermione received with the polite deflection of someone who had already decided what she was doing with her life and was simply being gracious about not saying so directly. Ron had spent 40 minutes talking to Steve Rogers about what it felt like to wake up after a long time and find the world different than you expected, and Harry had watched that conversation from across the room with a quiet recognition of exactly why Ron had sought it out. Rogers had been thoughtful and honest and hadn't given Ron platitudes, had talked about grief and disorientation with the specific authority of someone who had no alternative but to understand both, and Ron had listened the way he always listened when something was real. He's a good man, Ron said to Harry, afterward, in the lift. Yes, Harry said. Very earnest, Ron said. Like, genuinely. No performance. It takes some people that way, Harry said. Surviving a long time. Strips out the pretense. Ron thought about that. Is that what happened to you? He said. Not accusatory, just curious. Just Ron. I only survived about an hour, Harry said. But it was a significant hour. Fred would say that's the most dramatic thing anyone's ever said in a lift, Ron said. He'd be right, Harry said. They were both quiet for a moment. The lift descended. I'm going back to the burrow tonight, Ron said. Mum asked. George is, he paused. George is doing the thing where he works constantly so he doesn't have to stop and feel anything. Mum's worried. Go, Harry said. Stay as long as you need. What about Hermione and I have the next stage, Harry said. And the cases in the Midlands are tomorrow, I'll take Coulson. He looked at Ron. The work will be there when you come back. Your family is now. Ron nodded. You'll be careful. I'll be fine, Harry said. That's not what I asked, Ron said. Harry looked at him. I'll be careful, he said. Ron nodded again. Good. He looked at the lift doors. I keep thinking about what you said, that you felt yourself for the first time. In the forest. He was quiet. I wonder if I'll ever feel that. You will, Harry said. How do you know? Because you're already moving toward it, Harry said. You chose what you want to do. You didn't let anyone choose for you. That's the start of it. Ron considered that. The Argus Filch Scholarship, he said. Among other things, Harry said. The lift opened. They went out into the grey London morning and Ron flagged a cab with the slightly uncertain confidence of someone who'd learned this from watching Hermione do it, and Harry stood on the pavement and watched the cab join the traffic and felt the ordinary world moving around him, the weight of people on the street, the specific frequencies of London, a city that had been 1,000 things and held all of them simultaneously. He turned back toward the building. Fury was waiting outside, which meant he'd come down specifically to wait, which meant something. Walk with me, Fury said. They walked. The South Bank was a 10-minute distance and Fury moved through it with the particular efficiency of a man who is never not working but who has, somewhere along the way, learned to work outdoors. The Thames was flat and grey to their left. Normal people did normal things on a Tuesday morning. I need to ask you something directly, Fury said, and I need you to answer it the same way. Go ahead, Harry said. What happens in 10 years? Fury said. 20. You're 17 now. That power signature of yours, Coulson's analysis suggests it's still developing. The full scope of what you're capable of won't be clear for years. He looked straight ahead. I've watched what happens to people with extraordinary capability over time. The ones who become something we have to worry about don't start out wanting to. They start out like you. Clear purpose, ethical framework, people they care about. He paused. And then things get complicated. You're asking if I'll stay the person I am now, Harry said. I'm asking if you've thought about it, Fury said. Harry had. In the forest, in the between place, in every conversation since, it had been running as a background process, the question of what you did with being this. The people who go wrong, in my experience, he said, are the ones who stop being accountable to anyone. Who get isolated. Who decide that their judgment is so superior that the normal processes don't apply. He looked at the river. I'm not going to do that because I have active structural reasons not to. Such as? Hermione will tell me when I'm wrong, Harry said. Ron will tell me when I'm being an idiot. McGonagall will tell me when I'm being grandiose. He glanced at Fury. And apparently I now have a line to someone who has built an entire career around the question of how you hold extraordinary individuals accountable without destroying them. He paused. I'm going to use that line both ways. Not just to report problems. To invite scrutiny. Fury was quiet for a moment. Most people would have said something about self-discipline and moral clarity, he said. Self-discipline and moral clarity are internal, Harry said. They're necessary but they're not sufficient, because internal controls have blind spots. External accountability is what catches the blind spots. You sound like someone who spent a lot of time thinking about what went wrong with the person who tried to kill him, Fury said. I had access to 60 years of Tom Riddle's decision-making process through the pensieve, Harry said. The pattern is very clear when you can see the whole arc of it. He looked at Fury. He isolated. He convinced himself his judgment was beyond question. He surrounded himself with people who were afraid of him instead of people who would challenge him. He paused. I've been told by multiple people in my life that I was special and important and chosen. I've been told by multiple institutions that my importance justified things being done to me without my consent. I have a very clear picture of what happens when the narrative of exceptional importance goes unexamined. Fury stopped walking. Harry stopped beside him, both of them looking at the river. I want to be clear about what I'm offering, Fury said. It's not employment. It's not allegiance. It's not a reporting structure. He looked at Harry directly. It's a relationship between two people who both operate in spaces most of the world doesn't know exist and who can be useful to each other without either one being in the other's pocket. Mutual accountability without subordination, Harry said. Yes, Fury said. I can work with that, Harry said. Fury extended his hand. Harry shook it. Don't make me regret this, Fury said. Don't give me a reason to, Harry said. Fury's not-quite smile appeared briefly and vanished. Fair, he said. The remaining British cases took 4 days. Harry and Coulson moved through them methodically, the East Midlands, the Welsh border, a small town in Northern Ireland, 2 in central Scotland. Each one different. A 12-year-old girl who'd been told she was dangerously unstable and needed the binding for her own safety. A 16-year-old boy whose wizarding family had arranged the binding without telling him because the particular quality of his power frightened them. An 8-year-old whose binding had been in place so long and been so deeply integrated that undoing it required Harry to work for nearly 2 hours, slowly, with the focused care of a surgeon. The 8-year-old's name was Sam. Sam looked at him afterward with enormous brown eyes and said, "It feels like sunshine." Harry sat on the floor of Sam's bedroom and felt something settle in him that he recognized, after a moment, as peace. Not the absence of difficulty, there was plenty of difficulty ahead, the international cases and the legal proceedings and the institutional reform and the long work of building something that would outlast any individual. Not rest, not resolution. Just peace. The specific variety that comes from being exactly where you're supposed to be, doing exactly the thing that's yours to do, without anyone else's design around it. He thought about Dumbledore in the between place saying the choice was always real. He thought about Snape and the memory of his mother burning through 60 years of obligation. He thought about Helga Hufflepuff and the afternoon in the garden, and I believe we have been thinking about this incorrectly for a very long time. He thought about a cupboard under the stairs and a letter arriving on a Tuesday and a boy who had never been asked what he wanted. Yeah, he told Sam. Like sunshine. That's exactly right. The Wisengamot session was 3 weeks later. Hermione had prepared it with a thoroughness that Harry suspected was actually beyond comprehensive and had crossed into a new category that didn't have a name yet. The documentation was organized into 7 portfolios: the binding program history, the Prometheus Protocol evidence, the founder's record, the individual case testimonies including Marcus Okafor who had traveled from London to Edinburgh specifically to give his, the legal analysis of the charter violations, the Muggle government documentation that Fury had delivered in a format clean enough to withstand dual-system scrutiny, and finally a reform proposal that was specific enough to be implementable and visionary enough to matter. The session was closed. No press, ministry observers only, the traditional format. Harry had agreed to this over Hermione's mild objection because he wanted the first hearing to be thorough rather than theatrical and because he had a plan for after. He stood at the advocate's position in the Wisengamot chamber, a circular room in the Ministry of Magic that had been used for governance and justice and, historically, a great deal of injustice, its walls hung with portraits of former chief warlocks going back 4 centuries. And he looked at the assembled Wisengamot and felt the room's collective weight. Fear. Skepticism. The institutional defensiveness of people who had been running a system for a long time and were now being told the system was wrong. Also, from some of them, and this was the part Harry had been hoping for, a particular quality of relief. The relief of people who had known something was wrong and hadn't had the framework or the courage to say so and were now being given both. He spoke for 40 minutes without notes. Not about himself, he mentioned the bindings once, briefly, with the directness of someone stating a fact rather than seeking sympathy. He spoke about the historical record. About the founders' debate and what 800 years of documentation showed. About the 11 children in Britain who were now unbound and what their lives looked like after. About what the Prometheus Protocol was and how long it had been running and who had funded it and what it had done. He spoke about what the wizarding world could be if it stopped making its first response to extraordinary people a management problem. He wasn't dramatic about it. He was clear. The room listened with the quality of attention that belongs to people who are hearing something they can't easily dismiss. When he finished there was a silence of the kind that doesn't mean emptiness but means weight, the silence of a room full of people adjusting their understanding of something. Madam Bones, who had been appointed acting minister pending elections and who had been listening with the focused attention of a woman who had spent her career in law and knew the difference between a strong case and an overwhelming one, spoke first. "The Prometheus Protocol documentation," she said. "You have the full funding chain. 7 portfolios on your desk," Hermione said from the advocate's bench, with the pleasant precision of someone who has already anticipated every possible follow-up question. "The international cases," said a Wisengamot member near the back, older, traditional, the type Harry had expected resistance from. "These are beyond our jurisdiction." "The British end of the funding is not beyond your jurisdiction," Harry said. "The reform framework doesn't require international coordination to implement domestically. The international process runs parallel, not dependent." He met the man's eyes. "You can start here without waiting for anyone else. In fact, starting here makes the international case easier." The man was quiet. "The founder's record," said another member, younger, the one who'd been showing signs of the relief Harry had identified. "This is authenticated by 3 independent magical historians and 2 Muggle archivists at Oxford," Hermione said. "The authentication documentation is in Portfolio 3. The session ran for 3 hours. Harry answered questions directly and without deflection, referred specifics to Hermione with the easy efficiency of 2 people who had been working together so long that the handoff was invisible, and twice corrected mischaracterizations of the record with the calm precision of someone who had read everything and remembered all of it. At the end, Madam Bones called for a preliminary motion. The vote on opening a formal inquiry into the Prometheus Protocol passed 22-4. The 4 who voted against were, Harry noted, all members of families whose names appeared in the funding documentation. He mentioned this to Hermione afterward in the corridor. "I know," she said, already making a note. "That's useful. Is it appropriate that I find that slightly funny?" Harry said. "Given everything," Hermione said, "I think appropriate is a flexible concept today." Tom Riddle was transferred to a secure Muggle facility outside Oxford 2 days after the Wisengamot session. Harry had arranged it, not as punishment, or not only as punishment, but as a practical necessity given that keeping him at Hogwarts was unsustainable and that a wandless, magicless elderly man was, in the Muggle system, simply an elderly man with some unusual history and an outstanding set of questions to answer about events going back 60 years. He went to say goodbye the morning of the transfer. Riddle was sitting by his window with one of the Muggle paperbacks, the thriller, not Locke, and he looked up when Harry came in with the expression he'd been wearing increasingly these last few weeks, the one that was still calculating but calculating something different now. Something internal. "The facility," Riddle said. "Comfortable," Harry said. "Full library. Access to a garden." He paused. "Bars on the windows." "Obviously," Riddle said. He looked at the book in his hands. "I find," he said, after a moment, "that I am not, the loss of magic is not what I expected it to be." "What did you expect?" "Nothing," Riddle said. I expected to feel nothing without it. To be nothing. He turned the book over. I feel, he stopped. The calculating expression did something unusual. Something that was almost, in its specific quality, like bewilderment. I feel things I spent 60 years suppressing. The Horcruxes took them. Each one took something. He looked at Harry. I feel afraid, he said, and the honesty of it was so stripped of everything that had ever dressed it up before that it landed hard. Not of death. Of the years. Of what they were. Harry looked at him. Good, he said. Good, Riddle repeated. That fear is the start of something, Harry said. What you do with it is up to you. For the first time in a long time, genuinely up to you. He held Riddle's gaze. There are people who want to study the Horcrux process. Healers, researchers. They'll come to you with questions. You have the choice to answer them or not. He paused. I'd recommend answering. Not for absolution, I don't think you'd accept that framing anyway, but because the knowledge could prevent someone else from going down the same road. Riddle looked at the garden through the bars of his window. You came to say goodbye, he said. Not a question. Yes, Harry said. You won't be back. Probably not, Harry said. Unless you ask. Riddle was quiet for a long time. Then, I should have met you differently, he said. In another version of things. When you were a child. He looked at Harry. I saw the power in you from the beginning. I interpreted it as a threat. If I had, he stopped. If you had asked what I wanted, Harry said quietly. Riddle looked at him. Something moved in his face that was too complicated and too private for Harry to name and that he didn't try to. Yes, Riddle said. Harry nodded. He didn't say anything more. Some things didn't need a response, they needed acknowledgement and space. He gave both. He left. He went back to Hogwarts. Not because it was the most logical place to be, there were things to do in London, the international cases were beginning to mobilize, Fury had sent 3 briefings in the last week and Coulson was going to New York on Wednesday. There were things happening that required attention and would continue to require attention for the foreseeable future. He went back to Hogwarts because it was the first place he'd ever felt the castle reach for him, the first place something in the world had said yes, you, here, and because McGonagall had written to tell him the restoration work was beginning on the damaged sections and had included, at the bottom of her letter, in her precise handwriting, your input would be welcome, if you have time. He had time. The castle looked different in November. Clean snow on the grounds, the lake iron gray under an early winter sky, the towers rising against it with the particular stubborn grace of a thing that had been standing for a long time and planned to keep standing. He came through the gates and felt Hogwarts register him, that deep, intelligent warmth, the adjustment in the structure, the sense of something vast and ancient settling itself slightly. Welcome back, the castle said, in the way it had always said things, not in words, never in words, just in the quality of the air and the angle of the light and the specific resonance of the stones underfoot. He went up to the headmistress's office. McGonagall was behind the desk, behind it, properly, for the first time Harry had seen. She looked up when he came in. She looked, he thought, like herself, more herself than she'd been able to be in years, the particular quality of a person occupying a position they were made for. Mr. Potter, she said. Professor, he said, and sat down across from her, and felt the rightness of that specific configuration, this desk, this room, the two of them facing each other across it without the old weight of concealed information between them. Dumbledore's portrait was, for once, quiet. The painted figure had its eyes open and was watching, and Harry looked at it for a moment and felt, not warmth, not entirely, but something honest. The acknowledgement of a complicated thing that had been what it was and had consequences that were real, and that was also, in its way, finished. He nodded at the portrait. The portrait nodded back. The restoration plans, McGonagall said, spreading them across the desk. The East Tower. The corridor on the 4th floor. The section of the grounds wall. She pointed. And there is a chamber below the castle that I was apparently unaware of which will need assessing. I can help with the chamber, Harry said. I assumed you could, she said dryly. There is also the question of the curriculum. Harry looked up. The current curriculum, McGonagall said, with the particular precision of someone who has been waiting a long time to say something, does not adequately address what students with exceptional ability need. It is designed for the median. It serves the median adequately and everyone else poorly. She looked at him over her reading glasses. I want to change that. I need help designing what that change looks like. I have some thoughts, Harry said. I suspected you might, she said. I also need someone to teach a class. Harry stared at her. Defense against the dark arts, she said. Temporarily. Until a permanent appointment is made. Which may take some time. The expression at the corner of her mouth was absolutely, completely neutral. I understand if you're busy. He thought about it for approximately 2 seconds. I'll do it, he said. Naturally, she said. He looked at the restoration plans, the castle plans, the thing that Hogwarts was going to become. He thought about Clara Webb with light in her palm and Marcus Okafor laughing in his living room and Sam who said it felt like sunshine. He thought about Hermione with 7 portfolios and Ron in the Burrow with his family and George opening the shop on a Tuesday morning with Fred's name on the scholarship fund and the specific stubborn brightness of that. He thought about 11 countries and 63 cases and a legal framework being built brick by patient brick. He thought about a phone in his pocket that went both ways. He thought about a book in his bag that had been waiting in the dark for 800 years and was finally, carefully, being read. He thought about a boy in a forest letting go of everything he'd been told to be and finding, in the space it left, exactly who he was. Right, he said, and pulled the plans toward him. Let's start with the East Tower. McGonagall passed him a quill. Outside, Hogwarts shifted around them, old stones and new light, 800 years of argument and love and fear and stubborn brilliant human hope, and somewhere deep below them, a chamber that had been waiting for someone to ask the right question, and upstairs, the portraits of 42 headmasters listening to the beginning of something that would take a long time and go further than anyone in that room could see. Entirely, deliberately, freely chosen. Harry Potter picked up the quill. He began.